All right, hello everyone. It's everyone's probably most favorite video of the whole season. It's the tier list video with the always amazing Andrej from the Metropole Grid. We're going to be here going through the 65 or the 30-ish new
35
Corp cards. 35. Okay, thank you. 35 new Corp cards that were released with the Automata Initiative, and we'll be putting them in a brand new tier list. Before I go any further, I should let Andrej say hello.
Hey, how's it going, y'all? I'm always so stoked. I'm genuinely really nervous about this tier list because in terms of time that I've been playing with these cards, we're at a very low number. So like we're shooting straight from the hip, just like for people to understand a bit. Jeff, you're part of Null Signal and you actually do play testing. So you've seen these cards within, like you've had more time to play with these cards, right?
I definitely have, but I always think about the fact that like, honestly, probably by the time we're recording this, which is, less than 24 hours after them being live on JNet, there's probably been more games than all of playtesting. Given that there was at one point 40 games going on in the lobby, I will tell you, I've never seen 40 playtest games at once.
So maybe a bit of an unknown here. Also, for those who are watching, we're going to be talking mostly about standard. That's the bigger card pool format. Startup we'll mention a bit. Obviously, there's some very important cards here for the startup format. And the big thing about standard is that there's a big rotation happening. So not only have these cards just come out as 35 new Corp cards, but we've lost an entire cycle and an entire deluxe box. So just like understanding how the game looks, even without adding any of these new cards, it can be a bit of a question mark. So there's a lot of like unanswered questions that we're gonna have to answer today, and with a lot of confidence, boy will we.
I mean, we've never missed on a card, so I'm not particularly worried. And if people do want to hear more about rotation, they can listen to my very long podcast with members of the Snare Bear testing group, where we talked about Flashpoint, Data, and Destiny, all the highlights, and honestly, a lot of the lowlights. I thought it was a lot of fun, but and that can be, after you finish watching this video, after you finish watching Andrej's the companion video list where we talk about the runner side, coming up sometime shortly, hopefully not too long after this releases. When you're still starved for Netrunner content, that will be there for you.
Cool. So we're going to be taking these cards and we're going to be dropping them into these different tier ranks. We have slightly different tier ranks than with last time that we did this. So just to go over them really quickly, our top rank has always been ban me please, all caps. I think we've actually nailed cards in here that have been banned. I'm pretty sure. I think one of the hosts may have put twinning in ban me please at one point, which I think is looking a little bit optimistic at this point in time. Yes. We do want to say that a lot of the cards that we put in here, it's a bit of a pun title. We don't mean, maybe not a pun, but we don't mean exactly that these cards need to be banned, but these are the most powerful out of the most powerful the faction can do. And they're the sort of cards you definitely are going to know really quickly when playing in any format that they're available in. So very powerful stuff. Ban Drago. Let's go. Next up, auto include. These are the cards, I think we used to call this faction staples. So these are not always the most powerful cards or the most flashy cards, but the cards that you're expecting to be 3 ofs, if not usually, in most of the times that you sit down across from an Anarch or a Criminal, whatever faction they're playing. So very staple, fundamental cards that generally represent the backbone of whatever faction they're in. Very powerful stuff. Build around, there's a lot of cards that fall into this camp, and I actually am excited that more cards fall into this camp in more sets, because they're cards that are inherently good enough, we think, to see competitive play, but don't just slot very easily into every single deck that can play them. So sometimes you see very cool synergistic effects, and you see very strong things that you have to pursue, which makes for good deck building and good piloting. So I'm generally a big fan of that category. Our last two, slots are hard. That's a hard category sometimes to land in. Unfortunately, Netrunner, there's a lot of restrictions in the standard card pool in any format. There's only so many cards you can put into a deck. So there's a lot of times the cards that you kind of wish you could play, but are not going to find slots. You'd be surprised to see them at competitive tables. And then the worst of the worst, unfortunately, is Binder. These are just cards that I don't think we're going to see hit the table, because generally they have like fundamental flaws, or they're just like answering problems that don't exist right now. So at some point, they might become more prevalent if more cards come out, but right now I don't think they're cards that either of us will be excited to play, which I think, again, every set that comes out that we keep doing this, there's fewer and fewer cards that end up in this category, which is like a nice place to be in.
Yeah, I think we've seen the sets be really strong, and I think this is going to continue in that tradition. But yeah, this is always, these are always categories that are fun. I think the build around is probably going to end up being quite voluminous, but you know, maybe one day we'll think of a sixth item, but until then, I think these are some pretty good categories and very well outlined. Should we maybe, you know, so let's not waste everyone's time for what's assuredly going to be a very long conversation, go on to the first card?
All right, so this is our first HB card. This is called Salvo Testing. It's a 5/3 security subtype agenda, and it says whenever you score an agenda, including this one, you may do a single core damage. Do you want to go first?
I mean, I have very few nice things to say about this card, so I might follow, you know, the old parent advice. When you don't have much nice to say, don't say anything at all. You know, it's I'm glad to see a canonical step 1 score a 5/3 agenda get printed. For the Thule players out there that want to run a 5/3 and then a bunch of small agendas, this is really cool. And outside of that, it's really hard for a non-defensive 5/3 to see play. I'm personally pretty glad this doesn't have some kind of defensive ability. I think we've seen a lot of core damage Thule in like the previous standard meta with lots of fake points, and it was both, I think, not excellent, but just good enough that people would play it and it would be really annoying and a drag. And so I'm hoping Salvo Testing enables a slightly different type of Thule deck that's looking to move a little bit more on tempo, but step 1 score of 5/3 is always going to be a pretty tough sell.
I turned out, if you watch the last videos, I turned out to become a huge Thule fan, which is like a really messed up situation. I just really enjoyed it. And like right now, especially after standard rotation, Thule has some issues going on. Like they just don't have economy. That's always been a Thule problem. And now stock buyback is rotated. So like having something you can put in your deck to give you money, like, I don't know if a 5/3 is going to solve that. I just feel like there's a lot of problems associated with that. We already have a nice way in Thule. If you want to do core damage with scoring an agenda, you have Jupstad Grid, which is also equally expensive to Salvo Testing and kind of does the same thing as long as it stays on the table. So like it's not an effect that you're starved for. And also again, with core damage, at some point you don't need to do more core damage, right? Like the only big payoff right now in the standard or startup format for core damage is ontological dependence. And if you get to 2 to 3 core damage, you're kind of good to go. So like, I don't know, maybe you'll see flatlines with this, but like, you know, step 1 score of 5/3 seems a bit difficult unless people are scared of Cerebral Overwriter, which I guess maybe that works in the same deck. Yeah, I'm not too hot on this either. I think scoring out of 5/3 is really difficult, especially one that's not incredibly tempo positive, as much as this is like a, you know, an offensive ability over a long enough period of time. Where are you putting it?
I mean, to me, this probably belongs in the binder.
Yeah, I think so.
There's just like, as you were mentioning, there's so many other places to put like payoffs and places for core damage. It's just very difficult for this to line up.
Yeah, and like Thule decks, maybe it changes now with that stock buyback that you don't mind so much playing bigger agendas, but inherently also in Thule, playing more smaller agendas means your ability will be more relevant over a long period of time, and that's nice. Unless, and again, we haven't talked about the mechanic. Does threat 3 matter in Thule? I don't really think it does, so we'll see what happens here. All right, we got another one though. Oh, actually, I really want to quickly say, like, I was so interested about this set, and like, that's maybe not the best first card to talk about that, but like, understanding what HB is going to do outside of the last cycle, whether it's going to be more core damage stuff. I think, yeah, we're seeing still more core damage stuff, which is like, was pretty new for HB as like a real big thing to pursue in a competitive way in the last cycle. So interesting. All right. Stegodon Mark IV. It's a 3/1 agenda, so 1 point for 3 advancements. It's also security, and it says each run, as long as a piece of ice has been derezzed during that run, each installed icebreaker gets -2 strength. Whenever a run begins, you may derez a piece of ice not protecting the attacked server to gain a credit. Use this ability only once per turn. Whoa, there's a lot of text on this. So just to be clear, for this to be online, you have to have already scored it, and then you have this ongoing ability that will fire potentially once a turn, as long as you have ice on a different server to derez.
Ooh. Which is a lot of conditions. Yeah, this is step 1 score a 3/1, which is almost as bad as step 1 score a 5/3. That said, I think Stegodon is a super, super tricky effect to evaluate. Like, do I care about the derez effect? Do I care about the strength reduction effect? Maybe? I don't know. Like, it's a weird card, and I'm glad that we're getting this kind of really odd effect that you go, I mean, this seems like it could do something powerful, but is it going to? I think that's one of the really fun questions is that, sometimes some of the earlier sets in NSG were like, nope, this card's good, this card's bad, easy, done. So
it's wild. So like in short, going into the new meta, right? Like the new breaker suite for anarchs, that's a big question. And a lot of people's, I think we're going to default to what's the fixed strength breaker suite. So things like Buzzsaw Cleaver that are very bad at dealing with things with high strength. So forcing those things down to low strength, that's potentially quite powerful because it makes them very difficult, very expensive for them to interact with you, no matter how many turbines they install. Like it's going to be a problem. Now, what the weird thing with this card is like D-Res is also technically something that's beneficial for you. If you're re-resing things like waves, you're getting more power counters on your echoes, stuff like that's really cool. What's really strange is that most of that most of that ice suite is inherently really low strength, right? Like it doesn't matter how low your fractor is when you're going through echoes. That just doesn't matter. Waves, you can let them fire. It doesn't matter. Pulses, it's one strength. Like getting your buzzsaw down to one doesn't really matter. So then you have to start playing a deck that has D-Res packages, maybe harmonics, but also has other ice that you care about the strength difference. So like that's already a lot of things you have to worry about, let alone having the economy to re-res all your stuff. And as we said, at least for Thule, economy in HB is actually kind of a tricky question. This is potentially an expensive card, Cyber Sand Harvester or not.
I do think there is some other stuff in this set and some other like kind of standard staples in Gatekeeper and Magnet that are both effects that you're pretty happy to get their on ice res effects. And there's like this world potentially where like, oh, if I have a Stegodon resed and like the shape, I'm up against Arasana and I've got a Magnet like on a server, at some point, like if the runner runs a different server, that Magnet comes to your res, and now the runner basically doesn't want to run that server again because they know there's a Magnet there that the Corp is going to get a lot of value from. And we're going to get to a card later, which I think is actually makes this point even better in Ablative Barrier, where you can have cards that the runner's like, oh, it is actively bad for me if I allow you to res this. And that's where I think, one of the places where this card could start to actually look kind of powerful, not for the breaker strength reduction, but because we have so many more on res effects on ice these days.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. That being said, still, right, like maybe Magnet's a lot better with Arasana. I believe that. But like, how many times have you played that Elevagao bifurcation and thought like, wow, it'd be really cool to de-res a Magnet, and then you realize you literally cannot afford to do it? It's like way more often than not. And like, that's another issue you have to solve before you're excited to have to re-res that Magnet twice for 5 credits, right? It's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
For sure. HB did get like 2 little pieces of econ. Actually, I would argue maybe 3 little pieces of econ that we can talk about. Yeah. But yeah, no, Stegodon has a bunch of problems. I think its potential ceiling is like interesting. And it definitely feels like it's set, like we saw a little bit of D-Res in the last set. We're seeing a little bit of D-Res in this set. Maybe we'll see a little bit of more D-Res sometime in the future. And this could end up being, like this card feels like it has a lot of potential to me in a way that salvo testing like just doesn't.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning as a blanket statement, 3/1s classically not a good exchange of credits for advancements, but most of the 3/2s don't do much. So at least you get a 3/1 with an effect. That could be cool. What are you thinking about this? I think, again, future design space, this could be a very powerful card. Right now, I'm not excited to put in an HB deck. I want to do something a bit more direct, which like HB has been pretty good at direct. Yeah,
I'm definitely going to build some janky decks with this, but this to me is like, this is going to be a low slots are hard, but
yeah. I think it's fair. And hey, talking about slots are hard. Putting 1-point agendas into your deck, that just takes up a lot of slots, right?
Oh my goodness, it's so brutal.
Just an issue. It's so hard when you have to put so many points in.
Like I was playing over the weekend. I was playing Fast Advanced Weyland. And I was putting Hostile Takeovers. I'm like, holy crap! I have 11 agendas in my deck. Almost a quarter of my deck is agendas. This is too much. But
yeah, it's difficult. All right, cool. If we want to be a bit more positive about HB, don't worry. Wage Workers is here. 2 credits. Yeah. It's unique. It has all the subtypes: Bioroid, Clone, and Industrial. 2 of those being together is pretty wild. Whenever you finish taking an action, if you've taken that action exactly 3 times this turn, gain a click, 4 to trash, 2 influence. And for those who've been playing for a while now, know that this is basically a reimagining of a card that was one of the most important assets for such a long time. And also, this is where we get to watch Jeff be really excited about HB cards again. So what do you think?
I mean, look, I could have not, like, just basically a reprint of Jeeves is like my wish list, like just done. Thank you, Null Signal Games. Your check is in the mail. Next set's art's on me. Wage Workers is like just, I'm so excited. Jeeves saw play in all sorts of mostly asset kind of wide based decks. My favorite home for Jeeves was in ASA, which is still around, and Wage Workers is going to go right into all my HB ASA decks. I think the thing I want to say is, like, Wage Workers has some really cool busted combo potential. I think it also has some really good just generic value potential. And it's also one of those fun cards where it has the super high upside, but sometimes is just a glorified pad campaign. And I kind of like that this one card can contain all these different modes that are good for both players and create this dynamic interaction states. So this is one of the cards I'm most excited to see back.
Just because I think the power on this card, I think a lot of players who might be new to the game crack this pack, see Wage Workers, and be like, oh, that's hard, that's weird. Can you explain, like, why this is quietly such a flexible and powerful card? Like, what are the play patterns you expect?
Yeah, so the reason that Wage Workers sees played a lot of asset decks is a very common play pattern in asset decks is to go, I have, a bunch of cards in my hand, I want to install a bunch of them all at once, because what I'm trying to do is drain the runner's ability to, interact with all the threats I can put down. And so Wage Workers gives me that extra click to put down a fourth card, or maybe I need to draw up so I can draw 3 cards and then still get to put a new thing on the table. Wage Workers also, and Jeeves historically, was really good at turning on a style of play called Never Advance, which we've seen with Seamless Launch classically, but Seamless Launch doesn't work very well commonly with asset style decks because the runner, it just ends up not fitting in quite right. Whereas Wage Workers could be both an asset you put on the board, and then you can just advance, and that's taking the same action 3 times, and then so you get another action. And you can advance that same card a 4th time if it's like a 4/2, or you can combine it with like all sorts of other interactions that to help you kind of fast advance agendas or take things that were not threats and turn them into threats really quickly.
Yeah, there's some minor changes. Again, this is not a strict reprint of Jeeves. Firstly, it's not an alliance thing, so it's going to be harder to splash this. That was a big power of Jeeves. You could see in every deck across every faction. This you still can see out of faction, but there's a real cost to it. But also, this doesn't work with doubles or triples really well. But I think the most exciting thing about this card is that it does not have to be res to see, quote unquote, the 3 actions. So like you can do install, res something like a Spin Doctor, or draw a free card with Nearth Hub, install the Wage Workers, res the Wage Workers, install a 3rd card, and get your value. So like just super flexible in the Corp's favor, on top of the fact that you can't do like obviously get a click back after you mutually assured destruction. It's probably for the best, but yeah, that's powerful. That's a good ability.
Yeah. The other thing to note is this can trigger multiple times in the turn. So if you can play 3 events and then advance a card 3 times, you get 2 extra clips total across the turn for Wage Workers, and you can keep chaining that. I think in reality, this is probably going to be pretty close to Jeeves in a lot of play patterns, with that upside of you'll probably get to use it the turn you install it, which is a huge upgrade from an efficiency standpoint. And yeah, sometimes you'll have those combo turns. I think in the runners, the downsides being, everyone except HB obviously is going to be paying influence for this directly, rather than getting to put other good cards they want to put in their deck in and then getting an upgrade for free. And the trash cost is a little bit lower, which I think is, good considering that Wizard is no longer a legal runner. So.
Wait, was Jeeves 5? Yeah, right?
Jeeves was 5, yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that. I thought it was 4. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, pretty great. Jeeves was a very big staple back in the day. Where are we putting this? I don't think it's a straight auto include in every HB deck, because only some decks can use it, but like, damn, that's one of the strongest build arounds if you are going that way.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I almost want to put it in an auto include because it does feel different to me from a build around.
That's true.
It's like it's immediately our first card in auto include is not an auto include in every type of deck. So maybe it has to be top of build around to me. I could also see an argument for just putting it in ban me please, because like it's not like it is a build around and it's going to be hyper powerful. I don't think it's ever actually going to get banned, or at least I really hope not, because I love Jeeves with a passion. But it is a card, like it is an archetype defining card in a lot of ways.
Yes, incredibly powerful. Learning to respect it, learning to when you need to trash it, how to get value out of it. This card might not look very powerful, but let me tell you, that's a busted powerful effect potentially. You need to respect it. Really cool to see Jeeves back. Everyone loves that HB sort of magic. All right, we got our first piece of ice. Ablative Barrier. It's a barrier. It costs 2 to res, only 1 strength. It just ends the run. It's 2 influence, but threat 3. So for those who don't know, this new marquee mechanic from the new set, threat, followed by a number, is an ability that's only online if at least one player has that many or more points in their score area. So largely, these are effects that will not fire on the first couple turns of the game, and then the higher the threat number, the longer you can expect to go before you have to start worrying about these abilities. And this is really cool. Firstly, when you res this ice during a run against a server, you may install 1 non-agenda card from HQ or archives in the route of or protecting a different server. So again, it has an explanation text about threat. So the idea is that Ablative Barrier in the early game is just a face check that ends a run, but in the mid to late game, whether you've drawn this later or whether you chose not to res it to the point that there's been 3 points in someone's score area at least, this has a ridiculous ability on top of maybe a gear check that is not actually that important by the time people have their breakers down. So that's a really nice way to iron out this breaker problem. Okay. Yeah, I played a bit with this one, and very specifically, there's an ID in the set called Atea, which is an ability that fires the first time a turn you install something. It lets you do something else. So we also have that in HB with ASA Group. ASA Group is also an ability that says once per turn when you install something else. And it's important to know that turns are, in fact, turns. It's not per round. That's not a term that shows up in Netrunner. So your turn and the runner's turn are 2 separate turns. So this is a way that you can install something mid-run against a runner. That's a very, very, very powerful effect. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think this thing is so wild. This thing is just so wild. Like it's simply very wild.
This card's nuts. It's like being a 2/1 is almost as good of a stat line as you can possibly have for a barrier. Like, it's weird to say that but it's like, no, basically barriers have always pretty much existed to just make the runner find their fractor, and then their job is done. Like, a taxing barrier has not really had a big role outside of Eli, I think, in terms of the meta.
We just saw the last like pre-rotation standard tournament with East Coast Nationals just last weekend, and like Echo is seeing play, right? Like, we're seeing Echo. I don't think you're going to see Echo anymore when HB decks that are not playing the harmonics full suite, like, you just play this.
Yeah, no, it's also worth mentioning, those were the only harmonics in the entire deck. It was simply being played because it was a 2 to res barrier that would say end the run at least once on it. And yeah, I think that card it's immediately replaced with a Ablative Barrier, and Echo, like, those sorts of decks are never going to look at Echoes again, I think. Yeah, being able to install cards from archives in the back half-ish of the game. I say back half-ish because it's probably someone's on 2 agenda scores in probably most HB decks, where this comes live out of the 3 to 4. So it is kind of going to be a back half power on the on-res effect. But man, it's a wild on-res effect. And you can as HB, like, you could let the runner trash a Spin Doctor, because you can now say with a lot of confidence at some point they're going to run into an Ablative Barrier and I get my Spin Doctor back. They're going to or if they run last click, oh, there's Rashida back on the table. Like, this card has so many interactions that are going to be really impactful, and shift, as we were talking about with wage workers, like, this is a great asset card. This is a great upgrade card. This card, I think, is going to be everywhere and have a huge role in the meta.
And so we're going to have a lot of conversations with upcoming ice. Again, when we talk about ice, we talk generally about how bad's the face check, does it have any other attacks, and then how taxing is it to break. And luckily this one's so easy to evaluate because it is as easy to break as any ice could possibly be. So even if there's a huge rotation in some of the fractors and it doesn't matter, because everyone's going to probably break this for 1 credit. If they heaven forbid have to break it for 2, it doesn't matter. The text on this thing is ridiculous. So I was playing in an Atea, right? They run to this, I install something into a remote server, whatever, my other remote server, I get a free Spin Doctor, and then I use Atea to install a defensive upgrade on top of the thing that they're running, right? Like, it's just ridiculous. It's so much power. It's 2 influence. Anyone can consider playing this if they really want to. You generally are going to play this in either in asset matchups or something where you have that click compression off installation. And now what I'm really excited is when I'm using my Spin Doctors, I'm deciding what to leave in archives, which you sometimes saw that, now less so with archive memories, but you're deciding I'm not shuffling my Spin Doctor back into R&D because I want to have it on tap in 2 turns when I'll res my Ablative Barrier. And that is awesome. That is really, really neat.
Yeah, as someone who played a lot with Vitruvius, that was always in my like kind of periphery consideration. But I'm really glad that we get this effect creeping out in other places. Hopefully, this doesn't break the game in some way, but I think that like it adds a lot of interesting interactions. And yeah, I mean, to me this is an auto include, and this is going to end up being an auto include out of faction in a lot of cases, I think as well.
Just a busted ability. Watch out when they're on threat 3. You can run, last click Rashida on the table. It's so easy to get value from this, and for 2 influence, why the heck not? So like, just watch out threat 3. Whether that changes your deck building, whether you want to run 3-pointers, probably not an HB list all the time, but yeah, very powerful. Cool. Got another piece of ice. This is Jaguarundi. It's a Sentry AP, 4 to res, 3 to cost. And it says, give the runner a tag for a subroutine, and then if the runner's tagged, do a core damage. The threat text here is on threat 4, so slightly higher than threat 3. And it says, when the runner encounters this ice, give them a tag unless they spend a click. So you give them the option to free clear a tag. If it's going to cost them, a click. At least they save 2 credits on it. But again, it's they're losing a click they might not have expected. It's also only 2 influence. And it's a pretty reasonable face check on a Sentry. I haven't had time to play this one just yet. I am scared of this face check. It's like, the single core damage is not game winning. If you're playing Thule, you generally need 2 core damage for your ontologicals to be pretty good. But this is another ice that, like, even if it's broken relatively well, has an annoying on encounter ability. The face check is pretty rude, but I don't think rude enough for you to care about, like to not run. Like, I think you can afford to take a core damage mostly. But for 2 influence, I think you can see this as outside of NBN actually, outside of HB into things like NBN pretty easily. I just don't know if core damage matters there. The on encounter tag is cute.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, NSG is clearly trying to like make sure that every faction has access to ways to both generate tags and pay off of tags.
Yeah.
And we're going to see, I think, another attempt to do this in HB in just a little bit. This ice I'm not super sold on. I think one of the things the other dynamic that I think we're seeing is in Flashpoint, there was a bunch of code gates that the runner had to, like, if the runner face checked, were incredibly painful. And we're not seeing those effects on code gates in the set. We're seeing them back on sentries where they traditionally were before Flashpoint. And so Jaguarundi feels like it's going back that old school design where it's like, oh, if I install my sentry breaker, there's not too much bad that's going to happen to me. Maybe I'm going to give the Corp a lot of tempo by taking their code gate or now their barrier. But this makes me wonder, like, yeah, probably I'm not too worried about the core damage on face check very early in the game. And by the mid game, having my sentry breaker out first is probably going to be one of those things that I can do if I'm trying to be a cautious runner. And so I'm not super high on this card, but it definitely has a home, and Thule does look like a place for that potential home to me.
What I think is interesting, right? Like, this is, again, it's another, we have to fundamentally understand what the breaker suite looks like and then how people can capitalize on that. One big turning point in this rotation is that no longer can you expect everyone to have resiliency. We're actually, like, trashing programs can be a huge setback because you're not expecting everyone to be running paperclip, every anarch to run the whole heat breakers that are totally resilient to destruction. So whether, like, you have to start playing around Rototurt in HB, like, yeah, maybe there's a reason you're going to start face checking with a killer. I don't know if we've gone that far, but also understanding what it costs to break this. And mind you, you only have to break 1 subroutine unless the thing happens on the threat, which is kind of a nice wrinkle. I don't know if you're spending that much more to break this thing. Like, Carmen gets through it for, what is it, like 3 credits? That's not great.
It's not great, but Mimic gets through this for 1.
Yeah.
And I would not be shocked sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would not be too shocked to see Mimic become a really good breaker, because as we go through this, most of the sentries, I think almost all, maybe even all of them that are released this set are strength 3 or less.
That sounds right.
Yeah, so it's like the number of high strength sentries is pretty low. It'll depend a lot on the meta, right? I could also see a world like, I will always stand Revolver. Revolver gets through this pretty cheap too. I think probably for 2 credits though, so maybe not the best, but
yeah. It's weird. There's going to be a huge whiplash. Like, there's a chance now, again, Bogalter just got banned, that a bunch of these like mid-cost sentries are going to be a bit more annoying than we think we are. But the fact that you can mimic through this, Stegodon be damned. Yeah, that's not a great spot to be. The lose a click thing, like, that's interesting. There's more support for that. Again, Thule cares about all the text on this, which is like really nice and synergistic. Yeah. And it's wild how, like, is this card an easier splash than Bloop in your like Thule deck? Well, not exactly a splash, but like, it's funny how this so directly competes with something that's been a capstone of the Thule decks going now for a while.
Yeah.
It's neat. I don't know. I think you're going to see this in Reality Plus every once in a while. Like, I think you're going to, and you just spend a click and then you take 2 tags when you hit a behold or something annoying.
I think I have a different ice that I would put as my tag ice in R plus in this set, but
we're gonna
this
get
is
there.
not this. Yeah, this is still an option for that. I think to me this probably goes in build around.
Yeah.
I think like I've been disparaging Thule a bit, but this is a card that seems to fit in the Thule glove really well. So would not be surprised to see it play there.
Cool. So we got one more ice. This is a big one. This is MIC, Military Industrial Complex, is my understanding. 6 res is a lot. Is a code gate, 4 strength, not too bad. And it has 3 subroutines. The runner loses a click, the runner loses a click, and then end the run. Then it has this ability where you can trash this ice to make the runner end the run unless the runner spends a click, and you can only use this ability during a run on this server. Now that means the ice has to be resed, but it doesn't mean you have to be encountering that ice. So if you're familiar with border control and standard, exact same basic text. Besides, they can always spend a click. This is a really big enigma. It's enigma times 2, twice as much strength, twice as much cost, almost twice as many subroutines. Yeah, I've not played with this one yet. I'm actually really excited about this. We lost Fairchild 3, which is like the big 6 cost kind of code gate that kind of like robbed the entirety of those mid-range slots across HP decks for a while now. We're still left with Uncell and we're left with Brawn. One thing that's really fascinating about this card is like it technically does very little to nothing if you face check into it last click, which is the worst thing you should be doing if you're face checking into Biroids as a whole. So it exists as like a punisher. Like, oh, do you think it's Uncell? Run early. Oh shit, it's an MIC. You've lost your whole turn. I think it's a powerful face check. I don't know what are you expecting to break this for? Like, it doesn't buzzsaw immediately, but it buzzsaws pretty quickly for 2 credits.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does buzzsaw pretty quickly once you. I mean, okay, so yeah, if you support it with a leech or a turbine, you'll buzzsaw through this pretty quickly. At the same time, like, hey, almost any 2-card combination the runner puts together, being good against a piece of ice, is to me a little bit of a given of the game, right? Yeah. It's like, okay, the runner spent 2 clicks installing cards and they've like come up with a better engine than your 1-card piece of ice. That makes a ton of sense to me. But then you start being like, oh, well, what if I combine this with like a Manic Arm? Now my 2 pieces combine really well against the runner's 2 pieces. And so to me, this fits in a lot with the kind of PD style decks that we were seeing back in 2021, where you build a Doom remote, and you're just looking to drag the runner through it over and over again. And this card is just taxing enough, I think, to be annoying and worth the res. And then on critical turns, you can force the runner to lose a click or have to just go somewhere else, because you can do a lot of forcing with this click loss effect.
Now, trashing a 6 cost card, that is an immense cost. It doesn't matter if you win next turn, but like understanding that's very expensive. Yes, of course it is. But there's certain turns where that matters. Again, Manic Arm is a big thing. If you can't spend clicks on that, Ikua being a thing that you have to spend a click to steal, like that also is really important. And just the threat that it's there is going to change how runners run once it's rezzed. Sometimes they're going to try and bait you to use it to crack it, so you don't have it for the late game, the same way that you play around border control. But just understanding it's there is going to limit how aggressive they want to be sometimes on their remote server, which is quite interesting. Do you play this on op? Like, do you get your envelopment instant speed?
I think probably not. Envelopment is a good card, but it's a pretty rush-based card. And this is, it's like the play pattern right now that's all the rage is install a Oaktown renovation behind an envelopment and advance it 1 time. And you can't actually do that with a MIC, because you'll have no credits start your next turn, so you won't actually be able to score the Oaktown right away. Now, like, if we get some kind of very fair, again, single remote rush scoring style, maybe this will find a place in OB, because going, okay, the click compression can still be a big effect. I just suspect there's probably a slightly better use for 2 influence, something like maybe even an ablative barrier to put back a border control on your remote seems also really good in op. So it's going to have some stiff competition for that influence out of faction. But I think in faction, this is a really solid tool. It's a reasonably taxing piece of ice that also has a really good kind of late game kicker effect.
Yeah, no, I don't mind this at all. Understanding if it's going to compete for the slots for Brawn, and like, I think Brawn's probably pretty good without Paperclip anymore, is going to be quite fascinating. And it gets less teeth based off of where it's positioned on the ice. So you have to watch out with ice placement. I think this is definitely a build around. I don't know if it's an auto-clued.
I think it's definitely a build around. I think you're right. It's too situational to be everywhere.
Cool. Better than the Jaguar? I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. All right. We got an operation. Greasing the palm. It's a transaction for all the building better world lovers. You gain 5 credits, so you're gaining 2 usually, and you may install a card from HQ. You can also remove a tag to place 1 advancement on that card. So yeah, as you said, every faction we've seen so far in the set has a way to give tags and a way to capitalize on tags, which is something that's very interesting and new. That's actually brand new for a bunch of factions. But the big thing understanding with this rotation is we lose things like hard-hitting news. We get something that's similar to it, but we also lose cards like Boom, which was like one of the big ceilings where you could only print so much tag punishment, or sorry, so many ways to give tags to runners, because when 2 tags cost you the game, you have to be careful how easily you can give out 2 tags. At this point in the game, you can probably float tags to some extent. It doesn't lose you the game immediately. It'll lose you the game eventually.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting card because it feels like the tag generate in HB. This card still feels a little bit lacking. I need to splash some real tag generation.
Yeah.
Or actually, let's just in HB. I have to splash some real tag generation. Jagarundi is not going to get me the tags I need to fire this card consistently in kind of any robust way. But if I do splash tag stuff, well, should I be just playing a tag-based faction? Like, I have to get some real benefit. And this is a fast advance tool. I think if I'm like, if I'm trying to fast advance with tags, NBN still got the better part of the color pie there. Doesn't mean that this card's bad. I actually think this card has some really good positions in the meta for other interactions. I think the tag thing on this in HB, I'm not super sold about. In NBN, maybe you actually use the full text of this card. And that could be interesting.
That's important because like lateral growth is a card this kind of mimics. The numbers are slightly different, but we classically had an operation in the game that just said install a card, gain 2, no tag text. Do you play this as lateral? And the lateral wasn't the most popular card, but there were some decks, especially in the world of Jeeves and now Wage Workers, where like technically playing 3 operations in a turn was worth pursuing.
Yeah, and I think that was going to be the thing I was going to shout out, is that if you have Wage Workers on the board, like Lateral Growth saw basically no play, and then Sports Metal happened, and in particular Project Vacheron versions of Sports Metal happened, where you would Lateral Growth play a subliminal messaging and then like a red level clearance. So you had basically 3 pseudo clickless operations, one of which installed your agenda, and then you could use, at the time, Jeeves, now Wage Workers, to advance and score the agenda you'd installed on the table. And so that to me is the home of this card in HB, is those sort of HB combo decks that are looking to score from hand. This is just a nice little tool because it bundles an econ card and sort of a soft, fast advance piece into a single effect, which is pretty good.
The fact that you can grease the palm of Wage Workers down and then res the Wage Workers, like that's fire. I think that's such a cool positive thing for that. That's the sort of deck where you'll fire Wage Workers twice in the same turn, which like pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is like, I wanted a generalist HB econ card for most of those like Thule decks or whatever. I don't think this gives enough splash, as much as the joke is in some of those Thule decks, the load bearing red level clearance. Like, yeah, you definitely want some amount of economy in there, but I don't see how you're generating the tags. I think if you're splashing this out of faction, you can splash other things like Shipment from Vladisibirsk. I'm pretty sure is about 3 influence anyways. So like, do you just put that in HB instead if you're giving that many consistent tags? And even if you give 1 tag, are you excited to score out a 3/2 Vitruvius as your tag punishment? Like, I don't even know if that's the best thing you could be doing.
Yeah, it definitely seems a little bit tough to make that pay off. I could, again, going back to NBN, maybe this lets you, with a single tag, score a Freedom from Information. No, it doesn't even. Never mind. They would need to be like double tags, in which case you're always
remove the tag, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of, it's sort of treading water for a lot of NBN strategies. I think that part of this card is a little bit awkward, but the interaction with Wage Workers, I think, makes this at least a consideration.
It's so weird if you ever think like, I'm playing an NBN deck, I'm gonna import HB tag punishment. Like, what the heck has happened? Like, it's so wild. Cool. Yeah. I think this is a build around. I think potentially there's a combo deck in there that's really powerful. I don't think it's like generically really good. Again, if you can rush them through the Jaguar, maybe they're float the tags because it doesn't matter in HB.
I would say maybe in the interest of like keeping our categories somewhat diverse, I might put this at the top of slots are hard.
Yeah, okay.
I think there's gonna be very few decks that actually end up wanting to play this. Maybe maybe combo sports makes me look like a fool, but my sense is probably this is more a slots are hard card.
Cool. And we got one last HB card. This is Vovo. It's a Sysop. The res cost of each card, sorry, the res cost of each piece of ice protecting the server is lowered by 2 credits. That's an old effect we've seen a long time ago. But threat 4, the res cost of each card in the root of the server is also lowered by 2 credits. So not only Vovo, but all the stuff you have in the server, not including Vovo himself. And then a bunch of the sysops, not all of them, but a bunch of them in the set says when your turn ends, you may move this upgrade to the root of another server. So Vovo is always bouncing around as a target that like the runner doesn't need to trash, but probably would if he's there at the time. That's pretty neat. 2 influence, 2 trash costs as well, so like you could splash this if you want. I love sysops, man. I love characters. I love resing my stuff for cheap. Classically, some HB decks, some of the most powerful HB decks in the game were actually like defined by their ability to res stuff in a server cheaper, and this is no breaker bait grade, which was like the card back in the day. But and threat 4 is also pretty late on, so like how much stuff do you have to res? This is not going to make your refuge campaign suddenly make more sense 7 turns in, which is a bit of a bummer. But this is a really flexible card. I don't know. I played a bit of this in Atea so far, and having the ability to like res a bunch of stuff. I think the biggest thing for this deck or for this card is at least in HB, it allows you to do the derez ice package and it not hurt as bad as it could. So you have some good value to derez your harmonics, get more value, derez stuff with the Stegodon if you're playing it, derez with your Elevagao bifurcation. Like you have bunch more legs in it. But I also think just all the numbers inherently on this card, and I think you see this on a couple cards, like I think the numbers on this card, they're just small numbers. They're just like really tiny numbers. And so a lot of people might not be excited for the numbers because they don't feel impactful enough, right? Like, do you get enough value from Vovo in a single game? It's hard to say that you do, because again, you need to get this at the right time. At least you can put it in the right place, hopefully, by the time you draw it.
I'm pretty high on this card. You say it's small numbers, but I'm like, well, yeah, if I only res a single piece of ice, it's only +2. The runner trashing it, okay, net +4, that's not terrible. Once I start resing 2 pieces of ice, I'm like, oh, now you've really got my attention. And the other thing that's really got my attention is because I look at everything from the perspective of an ASA player, this is fantastic for fully operational, right? I can install this and leave it on the board and can just sit in the new remote for me, filling up that space if I don't feel like I have anything I need to do with any of my other remotes. Like maybe I have like 2 remotes where I have single ice and this resed, and a third remote with an unresed ice. I'll just move Vovo into that remote, and if I draw the fully op next turn, boom, I get to do it. If I don't, the runner can contest the Vovo, and I'm probably not too sad about that at the end of the day, because I can probably make it not worth their while with a now cheaper ice res. I think so. To me, this card's really interesting. I also think it also is going to have a home in precision design decks and Atea decks. Like the Atea interaction is huge to me, where you can install this in your. I think my mental model for how a lot of Atea decks are going to look is there's going to be a scoring remote and a sacrificial remote. Yes. And you install Vovo in your sacrificial remote, install your expensive, like your 4th piece of ice on your scoring remote, and then Vovo at the end of the turn just slides on in and says, I'll make that guy cheap. You've saved on the install, now you'll save on the res. And that kind of multiplicative power can be really deceptively good in Netrunner.
That's the same thing with ASA, right? Like you don't matter. Like it's a free ASA trigger, then you just put it where you need to put it, which I think is cool. I'm actually really interested too, whether like the sort of mental attack that this has, where like you move it to a server and now the runner's like, shit, I don't want to run that server. I don't want to give them 4 free credits of value when they res 2 ice. Like that's neat. And I don't think this is a hot pinhole target in the deck anyway. So I think Vovo goes unchecked for a lot of the game, which is quite nice.
Yeah. If the runner does say like, oh, like let's say if my server's like Gatekeeper Border Control, which is a pretty common like early game scoring server, it's like, oh, by just having Vovo in that remote, I get to res it all for 3 credits now, which is so much different from 7. And so the runner might just say, oh, I'm not going to test it all. And now suddenly I've saved all of those credits. And that's pretty wild. So I don't know. I think this card, like a lot of people I've saw in like GLC and stuff were kind of like saying, I don't think this card sees any play. I think it's going to see quite a bit of play, but I'm not, I could also see a world where I'm just completely wrong on the math, and in fact the numbers are too small.
I do like this card. I do think though there's a bunch of cards like this throughout the set that I think a lot of players will bounce off because the numbers they look too small. But that being said too, like the fact that this is an economy card that at least once you res it, you're guaranteed some value, like that's really nice. The fact that it's credit positive on res is like not common. Like I'm used to things like Yakov from the last set, and like Yakov, like you break even, and so like that's a fair bit worse. I think it's easier to get value from this than Jakob a lot of times. And like, yeah, I'm in on that. Man, like, the interactions with Asa and Taya are so good.
And also like Tranquility Home Grid interacts so nicely with this card too. This is gonna be. There's just lots of little things that I think make Vovo really interesting to include in deck building.
On that note, real quick, like that was a big thing about Breaker Bait Grid, is that it actually allowed you to res everything for really cheaply. So it allowed some like 7-point pseudo combos where like as long as you had enough clicks to win, score it, install something, you could res that thing immediately. And then this was a bunch of rotated cards. This doesn't exist anymore. But having a piece like that late in the game allows you to res a bunch of stuff during a combo turn can potentially be very powerful for a deck that I don't think exists yet, if at all.
Yeah. No, it's true. And hey, calibration testing, you'd only be paying 1 per rather than 0 per. Maybe you can make that work.
Just bring us back a team sponsorship. That's all we want with our Jeeves. Cool. Where are we putting this? I think it's definitely... I'm going to say top of build around. I think you're going to see... Yeah, it's
definitely not an auto include, right? There's no way it's an auto include. There's a lot of decks that don't want this style of effect. But I think it's probably better than Mick.
Yeah, cool. So that leaves us with HB. I think we have a bit of a lower normal than I think we're going to see with some of the other factions. It is always worth saying this is like HB apologists to some extent. HB just like always wins worlds. They just are like competitively have been the most competitive faction and archetype since like the dawn of Netrunner. So like having HB not be as prevalent competitively with the new cards of the last set, for a lot of people, they're like, it's about time. Let's play with core damage. Let's do something else. And this is a really interesting like mixture of like the last set, and then we're slowly bleeding in that sort of HB efficiency. So like, I don't know where the next half of the cycle is going, but I like a lot of these cards a fair bit. And like, I'm not a big Asa head, but like, I can see why these are really good Asa cards.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to do Jinteki?
Let's hit it.
Okay, we got an ID. So we have 2 Corp IDs. This is a Taya IP recovery, 4515 standard division identity, limit 2 remote servers. The first time each turn, you install a card in the root of or protecting a remote server. You may install a card from HQ in the root of or protecting another remote server, ignoring all costs. You cannot score the second card this turn. In case you wanted more ASA support, they just gave you another ASA. Isn't that cool?
Hooray. Now when ASA rotates, I can still keep playing ASA.
Man, the text on this is like pretty hard to understand, I think, to parse very like clearly. In short, when you install one thing in a server, you can install another thing in a different server, and you're locked to 2 servers. So basically you always get 1 free install. Whether that's going to be, ooh, there's 2 traps on the table, that's up to you. I do think one of the best, most powerful ways is that second install is ignoring all costs. So as long as you're putting something on the table in server 2, you can put that 17th ice on server 1 if you want to. I'm not saying that's what you should be doing, but that is technically one of the like 2 clicks for a single credit, or sorry, 2 installs for a single click, let alone a creditless install. There's a lot of flexibility in how to play this out. And the 2 server clause, fantastic. Otherwise, we'd be asset spamming for days. Oh, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, this would be wild without that clause. I think this is a really interesting ID. It gives me immediately strong Jinja lose on Central vibes, which for people that haven't been playing a lot of Standard, Jinja is an HB upgrade that says, when you draw a piece of ice, you can install it, revealing it and reducing its install cost by 4. So you just get these giant towers on a remote server, and often a tower on one of the centrals. But usually what ends up happening is the runner finds a way through the other central server or through both central servers and just says, okay, you can have your remote. It's 1,000,000 credits. I'll run it once so that you have to invest, and then I'm going to leave it be. And Taya might end up in the same trap, but Jinteki has lots of ways of making the runner not want to ignore their server. And I think, that could potentially be a direction where that ends up being quite powerful.
Yeah, I played a bit of this one, and I was like constantly absolutely surprised with what it could get away with. Like just nonsense, right? Like to me, it also reminded me a bit of Matimukundo, which is the only banned Jinteki identity right now that allowed you to do this like free installing on a server. So you could build expensive tall servers relatively quickly, but it's not a full Jinja nonsense, right? Because largely you're forced to kind of make 2 servers. And there's always been this issue with Netrunner called the 2 server problem. I think we actually called this out in one of our last tier lists, be like, this card doesn't make sense because you don't generally build 2 servers. You can now build 2 servers in a way that doesn't feel awful as long as you have enough ice to spare. So suddenly maybe your servers are not indefensible or impenetrable, but you have 2 servers that are both very difficult, and on a turn you install something in both of them. Like, that's kind of hard to do with. It's hard for runners to make that call. You also get so much flexibility with things that install clicklessly. We're going to talk about one of the ice. I think it's just absolutely so good in this thing. Ablative barrier is already really powerful. It's just like a mixture of like click efficiency, Jinteki, which you can rush with, get some good defensive options, and then you have the option whether you want to do like clickless installs with like you know, those assets that make it harder to run central servers, or just economy stuff they have to trash, or like traps. Like you can also play this as a fast advance identity, which I don't think is particularly nice, but you can play Bass Chiraboga. It does something.
Yeah, no, I mean the Bass Chiraboga or what's it called, Moonpool interactions are both notable as like, hey, you can fast advance in a way that like no other faction can, because no other identity ability for Corp that ever lets you install a card in a different server, because it's a really powerful effect. And not only is it in a different server, it's ignoring all costs. So these are like some really, really powerful words. And it's now the puzzle of how do you unlock all of that and make this part of a winning strategy. Because Jinteki has some kind of structural problems that could make, like, if this was an HB ID, I think everyone would be like, oh yeah, this is getting banned in a week. But Jinteki has some structural issues, a lot of them related to economy and related to like their ability to force the runner to interact at a tempo that works for Jinteki, that make people a little bit more, you know, probably a little bit more okay with putting an idea like this out in the wild.
It's like the Proptivos consulting issue. It's a busted ability in the wrong faction. And like, I think Proptivos decks are a bit slept on. I think they're better than they're performing competitively. And I think this is the same sort of thing. I also think this deck is a nightmare to pilot, like just genuinely a nightmare to pilot. I would, if I go to a tournament and I have to play this, it's like, if you think Ag Infusion is taxing on your brain, no, this is like 10 times that. The amount of options you have is astounding, especially when you start installing stuff on their turn. Whoa.
Don't worry, the runner side's going to be pretty free of taxing things as well. So
I'm really hot on this. I think this could be a very, very, very competitive identity. Whether we're 1 or 2 slots like low on economy, whether you can just lose on centrals, whether the ice is there, that's also a big understanding that we have to get through. Like, is the ice cheap enough that it's not taxing? Like, who knows? How cheaply do you break an Anansi? How we lost DNA tracker? Is a teeny good enough? Like, there's a lot of questions attached to this, but if the card pool supports it, I think this is one of the strongest identities Jinteki has ever had.
No, I mean, this is a very strong identity, and I like, it's one of those ones where I'm like, I never quite figured out exactly what a build of this should look like in playtesting, but I have a lot of confidence that someone's going to figure out something that's quite gross, or at least maybe not gross, maybe gross is the wrong word, just strong to go with this ID. So
I think you can get gross. I think it can get gross.
Yeah.
I'll just put that out there. I think it can get gross. I think that's like, I don't know. This is one of the coolest things Jinteki can do. Like, I think it's the op of Jinteki, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we have an agenda. The only Jinteki agenda we get so far, this is Fuji Asset Retrieval. It's a big old 5/3. It's an ambush and security. And it says when this agenda is scored or stolen due to net damage. Importantly, to understand that Obokata Protocol, the classic 5/3 agenda that cared about net damage, has been banned. So a lot of people are looking at this as the new Obokata, and I think that's a very interesting and very obvious, comparison. There are some ways that this is way more powerful. There's some ways this is way worse. Obokata Protocol is one of the strongest 5/3 agendas of all time. What do you think about this one?
It is, I think, only like Obo in that they both say the word net damage on them. I think functionally does something completely different to the game, which I think is totally, like, I actually think that's a good thing. I think pretty much everyone had gotten pretty tired of Obo. The types of strategies that Obo enabled was a lot about saying, okay, well, because this is a cost, the most important thing I can do as the Corp is make sure the runner's never able to pay this cost. And so the initial plan was like, oh, we'll stack it behind a bunch of data loops so the runner just can't have 4 cards in hand. And eventually it kind of went to the next extreme of, what if I just make sure the runner runs out of cards and doesn't have 4 cards in hand? Then suddenly I've got only 11 points in my whole deck, and that's a much better proposition for me as the Corp in terms of winning the game. Fuji Asset Retrieval does nothing of the sort. When the runner is on 4 points, they just win when they steal this. Like, it's just it's a completely blank card. So this card, while replacing Obo in the sense that it is a Jinteki 5/3 that comes out coincidentally with a Obo ban, it doesn't just go in where you put an oboe in. It actually has to go, I think, in a completely different type of deck. So, you know, in that other type of deck, I think it can do something really interesting, but it is a different deck.
Yeah, no, I've been playing with this one and understanding I'm on 4 points, and then you're like classic would be like, oh, I'm gonna put my Obokata behind some ice, and then they can let the Nancy fire. But it doesn't matter. And that's really important to understand is that when you steal this and you win the game before any additional text fires. So like it's just blank. It's like what's the other one? Degree Mill? No, that's wrong. Cut that out. Sort of. It's kind of like Degree Mill.
What was? Oh, I mean, the classic thing was always just if you stole the last agenda with no cards in hand against personal evolution, you won the game before personal evolution damage triggered. Fetal AI triggered on access, so I'm trying to remember what the other interaction would have been. But
so I'm thinking a lot of times like Degree Mill, it said like shuffle 2 cards into your deck. You didn't care when you won the game as long as you had 2 cards installed. So like whatever, it doesn't matter that much. Now, why this is good. Firstly, that's a big difference with Obokata. Obokata had an additional cost to steal this. This doesn't, which means if the runner ever accesses this and they don't have a way to trash it, which is not a universal thing people have access to, they're forced to take that. That's important because suddenly we're like immediately hitting threat 3. That's interesting. We're immediately hitting that breakpoint for complete image, the pseudo threat card before threat existed. That's interesting. The fact that you're now set up for something like a punitive counterstrike, that this does 3 net damage against personal evolution. There's a lot of ways where that is interesting. I think one of my favorite things is if you throw this into archives to set up a mitosis play, or sorry, Regenesis play, and then they run archives to just flip the Obokata as they used to back in the day, they can end up taking a whole bunch of damage in personal evolution that they might not be ready for, because again, as much as they did steal 3 points, they just at least took a minimum 3 net damage, and that might mean the rest of the table is going to be a problem for them. That's neat.
Yeah, that is neat. I mean, this card is going to be really strong in PE. It's going to be really strong with Neurospike interaction.
Yeah, Neurospike is huge.
The Neurospike Punitive Counterstrike fork is going to be a really big deal with this card. Punitive Counterstrike Obokata never really took off because Jinteki money was always a little bit lackluster, and there's not any real fixes for that in this set. But the fact that this can also Neurospike means the runner's counterplay of, oh, I'm a little bit behind on money, I'm just going to let you score this, and so what, is no longer available. Out of personal evolution, if you score a Fuji asset retrieval, you do 2 net damage plus 1 from the ID, and then you play a Neurospike, and you've now landed 6 net damage. So short of tech, you've flatlined every runner out there. And that's
good.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, scoring out your Obokatas felt terrible. You didn't want to do that. At least this does something. Admittedly, like, you need a deck that capitalizes on that, and Neurospike is a really good thing to do. But like, if you ask me, if you're playing that sort of like mid-range Fuji deck, if you're playing that mid-range Atea deck, do you play this or do you play Send a Message? And I think Send a Message is probably the 5/3 that I'm playing to solve some of my economy issues. I don't know if I'm excited to play this as quickly as I'm excited to play Obokata, but like, of course you're not. Obokata was in every deck as 9 points forever, so that's at least a good change.
I think mid-range Jinteki probably plays Send a Message or Bacterial Programming before this, but Fuji Asset Retrieval does open up the kind of, I think, what NSG seems to have been chasing in the last set that didn't quite land, and seems like they're trying to take a shot on goal again of some kind of net damage tempo spike to combo kill, and Fuji Asset Retrieval seems like a good spot for that.
Cool. So now Obokata, I think Obokata would be at this point a ban me, please. I think this is a build around because again, I don't think every Jinteki deck is playing it the same way Obokata does, and I'm pretty sure that the build around deck could be potentially quite potent. Whether we need to put it somewhere between there, something like that.
That's exactly where I was going to put it. So
okay, worth knowing we're always going to move these around, and I don't think we've said it, but left to right, left is most powerful. Right is the least powerful in that category. All right, old school front company. 2 credit political CD asset, 2 to trash, res only during your turn, so the runner's going to see it coming, but largely you want them to. The first run each turn cannot be made against a remote server, and the first time each turn a run on archives begins, if the front company is not protected by ice, do 2 net damage. Yeah, I feel like this card should say this card, not this server. That confused me. I thought it was archives. It's not archives. It's this card. Political cards generally work with that. They have an ability that's more powerful if they're not iced. Back in the day in Netrunner, they were only did something if they weren't iced. So you're not often going to see this thing iced, but you still can. It's not terrible if it's iced. Replicating Perfection. Yeah. Did you play RP back in the day?
I played a round of the people playing RP. I never really got into. Actually, you know what? No, I did start getting into RP. I never quite played the like strongest versions of it, and I now really wish I had. RP was this like this. It's one of those beloved Netrunner identities that people love
Yeah.
to wax poetical about because it had these really interesting dynamics and tempo exchanges. And to me, like even though the term actually originated before RP, was like the quintessential example of what people started calling work compression or click compression, where it's not that your stuff was unbeatable, it's that the runner just didn't have enough time to beat it in a single turn. And
Exactly.
you know, and that was, you know, we'll see. I'm a little bit skeptical that the same tools exist in a way that's as impactful as things were back then, because the whole landscape has shifted so much since RP was one of the mainstays of the format. But it was a classic identity, and I'm pretty glad to see it come back. We've seen kind of tribute cards in runner side a lot, and this is a really nice Corp tribute card.
So you play this in Atea. It's the sort of thing that you can cheat out in an unused server while you're like building up mega server. And at that point, the idea is that they can't contest mega server. They have to spend a click face checking into your ice. They can always go archives, and that's actually really important. When it came to RP, understanding how you built your ice suite was also of the utmost importance, because understanding that they don't have to make a successful run, they just have to run, means whatever the outermost ice is, you want that face check to be bad. Because if it's just an ice wall, it's a click loss as opposed to a click loss, and they have to dump 5 credits into their killer because they should, because the ice has been pretty rough. And then they can contest your remote server, whether you have other ways to lose clicks from that, whether there's a military industrial complex there, whether there's border controls, defensive upgrades, so whatever you want, you can make something really cool. And I think that's kind of neat. I do think a big part though of like RP to some extent too is like, this is the struggle. It's like, if this is taking up one of your 2 servers in Atea, your first primary server has to be generating an econ usually. That was one of the beauties of RP, is that your second server, or generally your defended server, besides some of the assets you were allowed to spam out because of that cool click compression thing, they had to generate economy for you. And while we have an RP, we don't exactly have a Sundew, unless we should be all playing Refuge campaign.
Maybe. I do think that's kind of I think fundamentally in Atea, that's going to be one of the struggles, is that the strongest like econ options that are like, I mean, actually, like per card, the strongest econ options are historically assets, right? They usually will generate more money than any operation will. And I think that's part of just the deal of the game, because assets are meant to be interacted with. In Atea, if you're putting a front company on the table, your other econ asset, which is where you're going to need to res all this free ice you're installing, is going to have to eat up that other server. And so it's going to just slow you down a lot. And if you end up ever having to ice the server for, you know, to get a Atea trigger or whatever, you're going to be pretty sad about it too, because you're losing, you now have to invest more clicks to protect archives that you weren't doing before. So it just feels a little bit awkward in Atea. Now, I think it probably will have a home in some other asset decks. Like, yes, there's a world where I could see Asa playing this list. It's maybe not the first card I would put into it. I think NEH might also be a pretty natural home, and Personal Evolution, being Personal Evolution and Replicating Perfection at the same time, seems pretty good.
That's like the interesting thing, is like, this seems nice in assets. The idea is that they have to deal with your central ice. Hopefully you have central ice, because mind you, icing centrals immediately isn't a thing most asset decks do, even for the first 10 turns of the game sometimes, because they're putting so much pressure on the remote servers. But if we look at some of like the op decks that are running spiky stuff that want to hurt you, they can use value from that 2 net damage. That's scary when there's bladderworts and other damage cards hanging out, what's it called, the hostile architecture, stuff like that, where you can make it really difficult. And that deck functionally doesn't have that many points if you don't have like a program installed where you can't interact with the SDS drone deployments. Like, the centrals are actually pretty robust in the early game. So it's still asking you to do a lot, but I do think there's still a lot of asset decks right now that can capitalize on the net damage mattering, as much as like I do think you'd probably just poke R&D, because can they afford to res ice on R&D on turn 4? Sometimes they can't.
Yeah, it's important to remember that Replicating Perfection was a big deal when Pop-Up Window was like a big deal to have on a central, and like Pup was a super playable card, and so there was this like cadre of like cheap, slightly more annoying than res cost cards. And maybe, Tithe is going to fill that role really well. I think it's actually a pretty good include now that Bakalter's not around, that can enable a cheap, low investment, high annoyance ice for the Corp. But unless you can find a couple more of those, I think Front Company is going to struggle to really find a powerful home, though it probably will find homes and see play, I think, as a really interesting experimental tool. Because the other thing with whenever you take an ID ability and move it off of an ID ability, you have to question yourself, can I build around this if I'm not guaranteed to see it? How central can a card that doesn't make me any credits be to my game plan? Because what is my game plan going to be when I don't find this?
Yeah, and hey, a good thing about Front Company, it's not dead if you ice it up, which is kind of nice. Like, that's actually pretty cool that it still does the click compression thing if you don't ice it up. Or sorry, if you do ice it up, right?
Yeah.
I think this is like going to be a card a lot of people are going to play. I think it's eventually going to be cut from most of the acid decks where like you can't care about all modes on it. So like, I don't know, Asa, you could, but like, I do think you're going to see in like Arctic Blood type decks, PE type acid decks. Like, there's a lot of stuff it will see play in. I think it's a build around, like, I don't know. Is Vova before Vova? After Vova? What are you thinking?
So I would probably put it after military industrial complex if we're going to put it in build around. I might personally put it in a. I suspect it's going to end up being a slots are hard card.
Yeah.
I think for the fact that it's not doing anything economic for you. Like if I'm playing op, it's like, oh, okay, well I'm splashing bladder warts. Oh, suddenly that 6 of my influence opened up, like on bladder warts. Am I going to spend another 4 on front companies? I don't know. Right, that's a bit of a tricky spend when I could be getting, oppo researches and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's a good point there. It's a difficult one to get like full value from, and like it's a bummer that I don't think Atea can do it as easily, but we'll find out if we're wrong about that. Okay, this is a hard part. We got some Jinteki ice. This is a TD. DNA tracker is gone. In its place, we have a teeny. It's a code gate AP, 6 to res, 5 strength, so that's pretty good. Those generally get good if they're close. And then 3 subroutines, they're all the same. Do 1 net damage unless the runner pays 2 credits. And then if you hit threat 3, those subroutines just become do 1 net damage. So the idea with the threat on this is that it will never be well, I don't honestly know. It's like, this to me doesn't make sense. It takes the choice out of the runner. So like in theory, if they face check into this on the early game, they can choose not to die as long as they have credits. But I'll be honest, and maybe this is just old Anarch, a lot of times I'm going to take the net damage. I want to save my 6 credits. That's a lot of money. Combination thereof, I think it's often.
I think a lot of Crim players won't because they'll have their one-of breaker in their hand, or like maybe you're Arasana and you have a program you care about in your hand, but you don't want to put it on a teeny or whatever. Like,
you just put it on the teeny, you vernissage it back. It doesn't matter. Just put it on the table. It's
fine. It's like my SMC, right? Like then I wasn't ready to put it on the table yet.
Let's go. For sure.
There's for Anarch for sure. I think you just say let it rip. This card doesn't change that threat. But I will say like 3 net damage on a base 5 ice is pretty hefty. It's the closest comparison I think at the same res cost as Sysoton. In the century
5 to res.
Yep. Oh, okay. So this sounds 5 to res, but 3 less strength, which is for 1 more credit, getting 3 more strength. That seems like a pretty good deal to me overall. And you can make net damage matter still, even without Obokata.
It's harder.
Yeah. Even without Obokata, you can still make it matter, though it's definitely going to require more hoops to jump through, which definitely kind of hurts this card.
We can agree the DNA tracker was like pretty far over curve. As like trying to compare any card to DNA tracker, it's going to look silly. Like DNA tracker did way too much for what it was. It was higher strength than this. It cost a bit more, but it was an and. So the idea is that it was good on centrals. It was a disastrous face check that could just win the game. And it was also really good at like protecting assets, which like a lot of Jinteki decks now hinge off of assets because of Vienchin Keeling and Prana and stuff like that. So this is a bit harder to slot into all of that. I wonder also if there's something to be said about Mercury, where like, not like you can put end the run subroutines in here, but like, I don't know, taxing ice, you put it on centrals. Ooh, they're coming for you. I don't know.
I mean, I will say, like, we were just talking about front company. This is the kind of ice that I would expect to see front company want to put on a central because, every now and again the runner can afford to ditch 3 cards from their hand, but they can't do that often before it starts to really tax their ability to do other things. And so, like, at the end of the day, if I'm resing 6 cost piece of ice and it costs the runner 3 cards from their grip and probably 3 clicks to draw back up, it's pretty fine for a 6 cost code gate. And if they spend 6 credits on it, that's still a pretty decent exchange rate for me.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I'm wondering what it costs on average for someone to break this. Like, I don't know what it takes. I've seen things like Umbrella getting through, but like 2-card combo, you're gonna get through a lot of code gates for really cheaply. But like, I don't understand. I guess Buzzsaw, you need the turbine, you go through for 2 credits. Again, that's a lot of work. But once you're set up at that point, yeah, it's gonna be a struggle for sure. But like Criminals, what are you doing? Amina gets through this for 4, I guess. That's reasonable, but it's a 7 cost card.
Amina gets through this for 4. If you're splashing Unity or you're playing Unity and Shaper, that gets through this for 5. Euler gets through this for, well, probably 6. Like, this is probably costing the runner, until they get a 2-card combo out, 5 to 6 credits. And so
not bad.
That, this to me probably belongs on the central, whereas DNA Tracker belongs everywhere. This still has a place as a taxi piece of ice.
No, I don't mind it. I think it's unflattering against DNA Tracker, but like, yeah, you can go through it now more often than not, because, well, not more often than not, but more often than you used to be able to, because of the subroutines and because of the Obokata landscape. So like, at least that is different. But yeah, it's annoying. I think that's going to be a hard one to deal with. It's a code gate face check, which is also interesting if we talked about how sentries are the thing that you have to really worry about. So it's at least notable on that front as well. This is probably an auto-occlude, but that's largely because Jinteki doesn't have that many mid-range ice at this point.
I mean, I struggle to say it's an auto-include because you also have Vampire and Nessa in roughly the same slot. From
which one do you like better?
I think, well, so to me, they actually belong in slightly different decks, I guess. Vampire and Nessa to me is kind of the tempo code gate if I'm trying to do an aggressive scoring plan, because it has a credit swing along with card draw on it. Whereas this to me fits a little bit more in those, I'm going to say the slightly more grindery net damage focused ones, because it does, in fact, does more net damage for cheaper.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. I haven't glommed onto Vampire Nasa yet, but I think it's just the sort of thing that the meta will adjust to, because again, there's no reason to play with DNA Tracker barring startup. So
I mean, yeah, Vampire Nasa looks terrible in a Black Orchestra world, but we're not in the Black Orchestra world anymore. So
exactly, yeah, a lot of subroutines are okay. So you're thinking it's a build around?
I think it belongs somewhere in build around.
I think you're going to see this pretty consistently across most Jinteki decks, but I think maybe because people don't care about Vampy.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's really high, but like when I think about like, oh, I'm much more excited to install a Vovo or
me too.
For me personally, a Mick, but like, I think you might be right. If we see Jinteki, we're going to see a teeny in a lot of places. So
I think you're totally right, though. I'm more excited for these 2 cards, but that's because they're different too. Like they're new. They do cool stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Funitria?
I would say Finutria.
Oh, that sounds nicer too. It's a spider, which is really cool. Atea is the web, and we've seen a bunch of spider ice already in Jinteki. So Sentry, AP, and Observer, so ultimate laser damage. 4 to res, 2 strength, has 2 single net damage subroutines, and it says when the runner passes this ice, if there are 4 or more cards in their grip, give them 1 tag. And very importantly, that's not on encounter text, so you can't blanket with, I guess it's now just like the rollerblades, but that's a bit trickier to deal with. Even if they bypass it, it fires, which is sick. Interesting, right? Like low strength mid-range cost sentries have been kind of an ugly spot. And there's actually a fair few options I think you have access to, right? Like Bathonimus, but like Saisantan you have, which costs slightly more, and I think is an absolute disastrous game-winning face check. You have Karuna, which technically can do more damage on face check and has I think the exact same numbers. Is it maybe 3 strength? Maybe?
No, I think it's also a 4-2, but
it might be.
Look it up real quick.
Thank you.
Yes, it is also, no, it's a 4-3. You're right. Okay.
So yeah, 4-3, so slightly better. Again, and in a world with that Bugalter, a lot of these ice didn't seem too attractive. And the fact that you MK Ultra this classically for 3 credits, also not the best thing. But the fact that it has a when it passes ice ability is really cool. There's a lot of decks that you can force the runner to have 4 more cards in their grip. Again, Obokata problems potentially. But that is a relevant piece of text, and especially if you get a bunch of these on the table, that's good. It's also very much worth noting that if the runner, like if you can build a deck that cares about giving tags, the runner inherently needs to care about having more than 4 cards in their hand, because they need to play around end of line and then potentially mindscaping. So there's some really nice synergy with a 2 influence card.
Yeah, and I think that's, to me, is what the exciting part about this card is like it's not stronger on a per stats basis than those other kind of cheap sentries that we've been talking about, but it has the when you pass the ice text, is, I think, something that runners are going to have to care about. And accessing with 3 cards in your grip as the runner, like, yeah, you're not in snare death range, but you're also not in a I can safely multi-access range. And so, again, this card on Centrals is going to really limit the runner's ability to interact in the ways they might want to, or they have to risk floating a tag. And I think Jinteki's tag punishment's looking, unlike HB's, I think looks quite good. Especially because of the combo with end of the line that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So.
It is worth mentioning that the runner has some ability. If they don't want to take the tag, they can just take a net damage, right? Or take 2 net damage. Like, they can control it. They can let this fire and get that sort of Karuna ability, which means that you'll never have a tag unless you're running with like 6 cards in hand or whatever you need. So that's kind of neat. I take it that this is the card that you cared a bit more about than Jaguarundi if you wanted to splash a 2 influence tag card.
Yeah. I think in NBN, if I'm playing some kind of end the line style kill plan, like, this is actually a pretty nice splash, because if the runner does dip down to 3 cards and then takes, to avoid taking a tag from this, well, maybe I can just do the very simple public trail end of the line play sometimes. Like, there's the runner being right on the edge of 4 cards makes a lot more different kill threats accessible to you as the Corp than them saying, I'm going to always play on 5 cards no matter what. That makes it much more difficult for you to kind of find the ways to kill.
It's really wild how many cards there are like this. Like, Unsmiling Serevna falls into the pile of like, that's expecting what you're expecting to res, expecting to break, does some amount of net damage, it cares about tags. Like, there's a lot of them, and figuring out what works best for the deck, I think, is really interesting. But yeah, inherently, like, Jinteki decks, you've seen a couple of them over the last standard season playing some amount of tag punishment. Largely, it's because they were splashing a news team as a negative agenda point in some of the grinder lists. That's all gone. So whether you're going to see genuine tag punishment in Jinteki decks, because, they can force you to play into this. And for what it's worth, the tag into this card specifically, a lot of the times the play pattern against trap-based Jinteki decks, which, like, you can put this in anything, is run early and then for the rest of your turn set up. So even if you have to take the tag, you can at least clear it. But there's actually not a lot of ways in the format to clear tags cheaply anymore, which, like, not that Citadel Sanctuary was everywhere. That's a really big change.
Yeah, it is a really big change. I think, to me, I would put this, to me, this is a build around card. I rate a little bit higher than Jaguarundi personally. I'm not that big on a core damage, and I think the other effect is a little bit stronger. Yeah,
no, I believe it. Interesting. I'm really excited to run to that card to figure out how I have to deal with it, because it does present some interesting choices. All right, and we have one more Jinteki ice here. We've seen these numbers before: a 2 to res, a 1 end the run strength barrier, a tattoo bola for Jinteki, also 2 influence, end the run. But it says, when the runner passes this ice, you may swap it with a piece of ice from HQ. If you do, gain 4 credits. This is designed by Yannick Stuckey, who won the 2020 International Champion. That's QVM, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. I think it's worth saying that it was put in a rules article just recently that swap is now considered to be an install for the sake of cards that care about installation. As long as the card that's swapped in is entering the board. If you're swapping 2 cards on the table, which this doesn't do, that's not considered an installation. But if you ever use Tattoo Bola to return this to hand to install a card on the table, that actually fires things like Atea, it fires things like Isa Group, anything that cares about installs, like what's it called, Tranquility Home Grid, all that sort of stuff will happen. Oh, well, not technically for this one, because it doesn't work like that, but just to keep that in mind. That's a huge difference on the power level of this card, which if I saw this like 2 days ago before reading that article, I'd be like, it's okay, I guess. But now that I know that, this thing is amazing. What?
I think this thing is amazing even without the swap on install. Because to me, this is double dipping on slots, which I think is a super powerful thing for Corps in particular. And credit gain having credit gain on a piece of ice, and that piece of ice being a barrier for Jinteki. Like, someone wrote what are the problems with Jinteki? Let's solve all of them on one piece of ice, or at least start working on solutions all in a single card.
And then, like, on top of that, like, how everyone's at peak magnet. This is so good to Arasana. Like, good luck with your nonsense. It's returning back to my hand.
This is way better than Magnet, I think, at actually coping with Arasana. So, I think if you're in an Arasana heavy meta, I would actually play this before I would splash Magnet if I have the influence for it. Because this will actually trash the Trojan. And then you can just reinstall it, and now every ice you install is going to have this threat, which is a big deal.
So like best case scenario, you have Vovo on the table, and then you're just cycling 2 tattoo bolas every time they go through it, 4 credits, you get that ASA install or whatever. Like, oh man, so much nonsense. The fact that you can swap this, get it installed in a second server, even get like potentially an agenda out if they run last click with like a Taya, like absolute nonsense. The fact that they can go through this and be like, okay, I'm returning it to hand, it's not that relevant right now, I'm going to put a defensive upgrade in the remote server, I'm going to put a spin doctor on top of the agenda that's in the remote server that you're charging to trash it so I can save it. Like, just an absurd amount of flexibility onto this thing.
Yeah, and I think like just like, hey, this is a barrier, so the runner has to go and find their barrier breaker or their AI solution, and then when they do, oh look, it's a nice little econ bonus for me. And there's this scary world where like, or not scary, but like there's a world where like, oh hey, the Corp has one of these in hand and one on the central that you're trying to run a lot as the runner. And so every time you run, you're making the Corp credits because they just swap one in for the next one and make 2 credits off of it and just they can keep cycling that. Like if you're trying to conduit dig on R&D and you don't have a good ice yet, like, or just you're playing criminal and you're trying to run HQ. Like these are all play patterns that are really, really strong even before you get to the like, oh yeah, if they run on the remote at the wrong time and I'm playing, a Taya or Asa, I get to start doing some utter bullshit. Like this card is a strong champ card.
Yeah, a swap, mind you don't pay install costs. So like the thimble rig idea, it's like, oh, this is an ice that I'm going to use later to reposition my nonsense. Like, so good. I don't know. This thing is nonsense.
This does also reposition your ice into like, it's very slowly in a very odd way, but it can do some ice position fixing for you too. Like, to me, this is just an auto include.
This is ban me, please. Like, I think it has a potential to be busted. I'm scared of this card.
I think this would be ban me, please. I actually might say we should probably also move Ablative Barrier up. I think they're almost equal in power level in my mind.
That's a big change for people who just watched the HB section. They're not expected to come back to this. But yeah, no, like just ridiculous abilities on gear checks that make them relevant into the mid to late game. And hey, Tatu doesn't even have threat text, right? Like that's always online. Wait, is it threat text?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Nope.
No, it's not even threat text. Like turn 1, yikes. That's wild. That's so wild to me. All right. Okay, cool. We've got some more Jinteki cards, 3 more. Mindscaping. Gray Ops, fun subtype. It's an operation, cost 2 and 2 influence. Resolve one of the following. There's 2 options, you get 1. Either gain 4 credits and draw 2 cards, then add a card from HQ to the top of R&D. And then secondly, you can do X net damage. X is equal to the number of the tags the runner has to, but it caps out at 3 net damage. So 2 of them, if the runner is flooded with tags, you can get a flat line on most board states. But otherwise, a flexible enough card. The gain 2, draw 2, return 1 is not card advantage, but it does allow you to like find the pieces and does some smoothing. You can also protect the top of R&D for a turn. The top of R&D is only important in this set for NBN, so I don't think there's any Jinteki cards to care about, but it also is really easy, low influence way to do some amount of burst damage for tags, which I think is actually really important if you're playing end of the line, where you can do like 2 dent damage to dodge a steel skin and then do 4 damage. Mind you, you don't have a choice how many dent damage you're doing. It's just equal to tags. You can't say I want to do 2 if they have 3 tags, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think to me this card is a little bit bonkers, because to me and maybe this is because I've been playing a lot of like a hybrid op list where I'm looking to both kill and also play on tempo, and this card also kills and plays on tempo. Like, yes, it's not technically a powerful draw effect, but it's a little bit of draw, a little bit of econ, and I get to move stuff that I don't like on top of R&D. So if I have effects like Spin Doctor, I can suddenly just actually remove a card from my hand without having to go through Spin Doctor, like while making credits and drawing cards. Or I can put, if I'm playing this in Jinteki, the ever classic, that's the snare on top of R&D. Why? Thank you very much for going and getting that. And then this also has this kill mode. So once I play one of these, the runner now says, oh, well, they're probably playing 3. So I can't just go tag me because 2 of these ends the game. Or one of these and then end of the line and the right circumstance ends the game. So like, to me, this is going to go in probably the first draft of every Jinteki list. Whether or not it stays there is going to depend on the ice suite and the game plan. And I think if you're looking at like kill NBN, kill Weyland, like this is a card you look at and consider and figure out, does this have a place for me?
There's NBN, obviously, like it works with the identity and some of the cards that are coming up. But you really think as like a 3 of in every Jinteki deck, just because the flexibility, like I don't think you're going to end up floating tags in a lot of those matchups, but like you just think the gain 2, draw 2, and shuffle is good enough cards, like a red level clearance of sorts.
Jinteki Econ, as we've talked about a bunch, is really bad. And so this is just a nice little smoothing effect, which I think is quite valuable. Maybe I'm just completely wrong on this card because there's not that much tagging in Jinteki. But it's also not that hard. Like, hey, this works real nicely with Snare, right? Like, there's just lots of these little effects that this can kind of stack with and become kind of annoying, which kind of makes me reasonably high on this card.
Yeah, I don't think I'm as high. I think I'm surprised. I'm interested to see whether this comes in some of the combo decks, right? Like they're playing, I don't know if you play 3 operations in a turn. The fact that it's also a combo kill piece that digs for other combo kill pieces if you have, enough of them and allows you to speed up. I think that's also quite interesting. The op interaction at the top of the deck is good. I just don't like economy's bad in Jinteki. I don't know if the slots for this are like good enough though. But
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I guess it's also worth saying, like, yeah, being a combo piece that can dig for other combo pieces. Like, if I'm playing a combo kill op list, right? I'm spending influence where I would be spending end of the lines. But if I draw 3 of these, I can play the third one to try and draw for my mutually assured destruction, biotic labor kind of stuff.
Exactly.
But I can just go off and get a free kill. So
okay. I'm not sure if I'd say that's an auto-clued exactly, but I think it's definitely like a potent build around, and like maybe it's flexible enough. Like for what it's worth, if I could put red level clearance in every deck for no influence, I wouldn't. And obviously that's a bit weird because I think that card needs combo, but I think if that card didn't have that fast advance combo potential, that sort of nonsense, I don't know if it's good enough for a slot. Like green level clearance, right? Like I don't know if that's good enough for a slot. This is kind of green level clearance.
That's a fair point. I'm happy to either. I think it's probably built around. I could see it. I think it's okay to me to put it below Fuji asset retrieval because you're not high on it. A lot of people aren't high on it, so this might be one of those cases where I'm really entranced by a modal effect, and in fact, it's not very good. Neither mode is actually that good. So
I'm excited to see it though because I do think it has places in like weird factions that you're not expecting it. So you have to keep your eye out for that. Okay. Adrian Saitis is unique, costs nothing to res. The highest influence card in the whole set, pretty sure, 4 influence.
Yeah.
Upgrade Cyclone Sysop. A lot of text here, so much text here. Whenever the runner makes a successful run on the server, play a Psy game. Really excited to see Psy game be like a typed mechanic. That was something that's existed for a long time in Netrunner. Basically, players from their credit pool secretly spend 0, 1, or 2 credits. Whatever you reveal, you actually end up spending that, so it has some implications on economy. If the bids differ, the runner cannot access cards other than this upgrade for the remainder of that run. If the bids match, the runner cannot access this upgrade for the remainder of the run. Wait, I said that wrong. Let me just redo that. If the bids differ, the runner cannot access cards other than this upgrade for the remainder of that run. But if the bids match, you can only access Adrian. Fuck, no. I fucked it up again.
Yeah,
this is the problem with the card.
Right the first time.
Shit. Okay, hold on. So, if the bids differ, fuck, hold on. I'll get there. If the bids differ, the runner cannot access any other card besides Adrian for the remainder of that run. But if the bids match, the runner cannot access this upgrade. So you'll be able to touch everything else in the server. You're just not going to be able to trash the Adrian. And then on top of that, when your turn ends, you may move this upgrade to the root of another server. So it has that sysops text. It's 2 to trash, 4 influence. All right. Caprice Nase was a card back in the day. Structured a lot like this, a bit more simpler. It's just play side game, end the run. She costs 2 credits. She's 1 trash cost. Didn't have all this other stuff on it. I think there are so many points on this card where you could have stopped writing text and the card would have been fine. Right? Like it could have just had a side game, half of it still would have been okay. It didn't have to have the trash clause, access, not access. And then the fact that you can move this guy around, like, okay. Yeah, even more additional text that makes this incredibly powerful. It's very much worth noting that this interacts in a way that you might not expect, especially if you played Caprice Nase back in the day, is that this does not stop successful runs. This just charges you, it gates your ability to access certain cards in the server. Now that's obviously interesting if you have other defensive upgrades that have abilities. It's also interesting that if the runner wants to flush out the Adrian because there's nothing else in the server, sometimes they just can't do it. Like you just can't do it, barring a pinhole threading with any sort of consistency unless the corporation is bankrupt. And then the fact that when it's not doing its thing, protecting your remote server, you can put it on a central and just say like, yeah, R&D is going to be hard to get into for a bit until Adrian's going to walk over there. And then it has the best timing. You move it at the end of your turn, which means you can get this down for Atea. You can get this down for Asa and then move it where it makes sense. I don't know. This seems like just absurdly strong.
I think this card's much worse than Caprice.
Oh, yeah?
Caprice could make it so that the runner was never going to get to your agenda if you were good enough at bidding.
That too. But Caprice also had really ugly timing because of the breach step didn't exist. So you could Caprice into like border control or whatever. That's not, you can't do that here. Yeah.
So you can't do that here, right? But like, even if you just think about like, okay, the runner should, like, going back to replicating perfection, runner would run a central, then they would have 3 goes at the remote potentially. Or sometimes less because they were lacked in credits. And Caprice would be like, okay, if they win the side game,
Nisei Mark
congrats, the runner out, or the runner outplayed me, ta-da. But Nisei Mark II was the often common thing. It was like, oh, I lost the side game. Oh, you gotta win. You have to win best 2 out of 3, which is very hard when you win 2/3 of the time. But Adrian, like, if you win as the Corp, the runner just gets to get in on the next run. And if you lose as the Corp, yes, he's still around, but all the stuff you cared about isn't anymore. So to me, I think it's a very interesting card. It has a lot of text. I think the text, fortunately, like bundles in the head fairly easily. But
yeah, I'm still not sure what I'm meant to be winning and what I'm meant to be losing. Like I have to reread the card. I'm not like I need more time with the card, but I'm often rereading to be like, oh wait, I want to protect it, so I need to lose, or do I need to win? I'm not there yet.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think the differ and match language is a lot nicer. I think hopefully is an improvement overall.
That's a huge improvement
on side game readability. And it's just going to take a couple of iterations of like, okay, the win for the Corp, which means the bits differ, is that he protects the server. The match means, do I get that right? Yes. Okay, maybe not so easy. Maybe not so easy. Maybe I'm hyping
but like, notably, I'm pretty sure this is the first side game that has conditions attached to both. Usually, classically, they're just like, if they don't match or they do match, do something. Otherwise, nothing happens, right? So like, you're gonna have to worry about that. Yeah, I don't know. I still think the defensive slot, like, do you play this over, which we haven't seen Anoetic Void be that common. I do think the fact that this works with Managarm Skunkworks in a pretty gross way, that they have to pay the Managarm costs and then still might not be able to trash the Managarm, that increases the value of this. And whether you're going to see this in like PD decks, classic PD decks, over the what's it called? The Anoetic Void.
The Anoetic Void.
I think that's potentially quite powerful.
Yes, I think the problem is like if I have the option of including Anoetic Void at the same influence, and I am not like, PD has historically not been like, oh yeah, having the cards in hand is not really my problem. It's the like, I need to make sure I don't lose unless access is the problem. I would just rather take the Anoetic Void. And then in Jinteki, like Jinteki has a lot of different options for defensive upgrades, and it's not clear to me, like, is this better than a Biovault that's sitting on a La Costa that I'm probably already playing? Like, is this better than a Nisei Mark II? Like, you've got these other options, and yeah, they're different slots sometimes. They revolve in different things. But it's just like, this asks a lot of your defenses and your server for this to be a really impactful card. And Jinteki maybe can't always reliably set those up.
Yeah, it's again, when you can put that 3-ice server with minimal effort, I think that's better. But of course, there's a bunch of options. I think this is still somehow the cheapest and the fastest, and is still reliable on both cases. Like, you lose the side game, you win the side game, there's still something you can be happy about, which is not exactly the case with some of the other side game stuff we've seen so far, which I like that. I like that a lot. The movement on this card too, like, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I think I'd be worried about if I move him to any server that's not super defended. I've just now made him, he's just like a target right away. So I suspect, unlike Vovo, I don't think Adrian's going to be doing a lot of calisthenics.
I just like, in Atea, where you use it as a cheap free install and then you immediately slide it in. Like, that feels so cute. Love it. Also, like a card. Yeah. Defensive upgrade stuff with free installs mid-run. I don't know. I think I'm hotter on this than you are, but we haven't seen a lot of Anoetic Void. It just kind of fell out the meta, and I think people are going to be pretty reinvigorated with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is worth mentioning this dies to Pinhole just as much as Anoetic Void does, right?
Every card.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know. I don't think you think it's an auto-include. I think it's a really easy build around. It has a very powerful effect on it, but I feel like you want to put this a bit lower than I do.
And that's probably where I would want to put it.
Okay.
But if you want to move it higher, this is a pair. This is the two of us, not just me.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, cool. We just got one more. This is Daniela Jorge Ignacio, an upgrade sysop. This one doesn't move. And it's 2 costs, 2 trash, 3 influence. As an additional cost to trash this upgrade, the runner must add 2 cards from the grip at random to the bottom of their stack in random order, I'm assuming. Persistent, so that's a kind of a subtype sort of thing that says, as an additional cost to steal an agenda, or excuse me, let me try that again. Then the persistent text is text that fires even on the run that this thing was trashed. So as an additional cost to steal an agenda from the server or its root, the runner must add 2 cards from the grip at random to the bottom of the stack. So there's no reminder of the persistent text on this one, but in short, even if you trash Daniela, the Daniela's ability will be lasting during the rest of that run. So you can't get away from Daniela. So you have to basically put 4 cards from your hand underneath.
Yeah.
Neat.
I mean, that's a lot of cards that you're
a lot of cards.
2 credits, just moving 4 cards from the runner's hand to the bottom is pretty impactful. I think so like immediately I'm looking at Fuji Asset Recovery and going, cool, this is a combo. And then I think about it a bit more, I'm like, oh, actually, is this a non-bow? Because now I've added a cost to my agenda. So if I'm playing PE or I'm just trying to get the extra damage, now the runner can decline to steal. And they honestly probably should. And that's a thing you have to ask yourself. Like, is this doing enough work in the putting 2 to 4 cards at the bottom of the deck to justify the slot, basically?
So there's a card that's a lot like this, which is Ben Musashi, and I've had this conversation so many times. It'd be like, why don't you play Ben Musashi in the deck? And it's like, Ben Musashi adds an additional cost to steal the agenda, so they can choose not to. Which means, like, if you just want to do a bit of incidental annoying damage, like, you can just play Hokusai. You can just play Prysac. You're paying about the same cost, and it's something that will not only fire on that agenda steal, but it fires on every single server all the time. So you really need a good reason to use Daniela over some of those options. Mind you, Prysac rotated, but Hokusai has a bigger trash cost as much as it doesn't have a self-protective trash cost, but it's always doing a net damage, and it's always relevant on almost every single board state, as much as the Obokata long-term strategy might not be as robust. So interesting. Do shout out here though, like the numbers on what this can do to you is probably pretty pushed because it doesn't do net damage. It doesn't grind you down, but it removes cards from hand, which there's a lot of decks, just as we talked about the Fuji, that is as important as anything else. And you're going to get more cards out of hand, well, specifically if they trash this, which I don't think you have a huge incentive to do, especially if you're stealing an agenda.
Yeah, I think it's like, oh, if I'm stealing the winning agenda, like, this card's blank. If I'm stealing, like, if I think this is the only agenda I'm going to steal out of this remote, I could just leave this here and then say, okay, I'm going to win the rest of the game somewhere else. So it's like a pretty situational card. It has this, as you were talking about, the super high ceiling. But to me, this is really a slots are hard card. I think it's a little bit better than Binder Fodder. Like, someone will find a way to make this do something gross in some event. It's going to be annoying.
It's just the Neurospike deck, right? Like, it's like you run this now, I punitive you. If you don't run it, I Neurospike you with a Fuji. Figure it out. And like, that as long as that deck can do that quick enough with enough money, that is hard to deal with.
Yeah, but it's not clear that deck actually needs Daniela in it. It might just have enough gas without her. So that would probably be why I think this is more of a slots are hard card than a build around.
Is this the first upgrade that doesn't just die to Pinhole? That's kind of neat, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I would say Vovo probably doesn't die to Pinhole because if Vovo gets Pinhole, I think you're pretty happy as the Corp.
Yeah, you're like, whatever. I think you're going to put one down, huh?
Yeah, I think Greasing the Palm, because of Greasing the Palm's interaction with wage workers, I think we're going to see quite a bit more of it. But
yeah, I agree. Cool. That's Jinteki. We've seen some interesting stuff. I think Jinteki is the hardest ID or the hardest faction to design for, just because their design space kind of covers a lot of things. There's some net damage. We're seeing a bit more efficiency now. So we're seeing a lot of like the old Jinteki stuff. And then like, I think Atea is just such a cool breath of fresh air for the Matisse stuff. I'm pretty positive about the Jinteki design this set. I liked it for a bit. And we do need a bunch of that mid-range ice because it's kind of been an issue. You don't see a lot of Jinteki decks scoring behind ice. Nice to have some ice back. All right, you ready for the next ID, the final ID from the Corp side? Epiphany, Analytica, Nations Undivided, 4515, pretty standard stuff. It says the first time each turn the runner steals or trashes a Corp card, place a power counter on this identity. And as a click, you can spend the post a power counter to look at the top 3 cards of R&D, and you may install one of those cards. So look doesn't mean rearrange, and install means it has to be an installable, so not an operation, basically. Once per turn ability that cares about steal or trash. Kind of feels a bit like controlling the message. An ability to rebuild the board that's been trashed aggressively kind of feels like Near Earth Hub. So we're comparing ourselves to things that were or are or really, really a long time ago were Titans. That's at least a nice place to start. What are you thinking about this one?
I this card's super hard to me because it's like, yeah, we still actually have Near Earth Hub, right? That's still legal. And it's so weird to think about, okay, where does this do better? Because I can obviously see a case where it does worse because it actually requires runner interaction to start doing anything beyond just being a 45-15 in NBN. And that's a big cost. But I think actually the upside might even be worth it, which is kind of like a thing that's going to be, it's going to take better deck builders than me to figure out. It's going to take better asset spam like yellow deck builders than me to figure out. Of which is probably most people. It's an archetype I'm not very good at. But I will say, like, I ran a future standard event where people just built future standard based off the legal proxies, which I think actually was all the NBN cards at the time. For the Sunday of the US Continentals. And basically everyone was playing Epiphany Analytica because trying to figure out what to do with Atea with partial spoilers was like just and people were like, I thought this was going to be really bad, and I was surprised at how good it was. And I think one of the things that looks interesting to me about this is that you can almost not R&D lock this ID.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where the power comes through, where you're doing some kind of fast advance, or where fast advance is at the very least part of your strategy, and this will allow you to dig an agenda from where the runner can't get it onto the board and then fast advance it in a way that they can't interact with. And that's a very, very powerful effect.
Yeah, no, this is the one ability when it was spoiled. I was like, whoa, that firstly looks fun. Like, it just looks fun. You have options. Translating a card from the top of your deck onto the table without having that midpoint of having to draw it. Like, that's really, really good. But then from that point, I don't honestly know how I win a game. I'm going to have a whole fun time, but like, I genuinely don't know how you're meant to win a game with this ability. So it's going to revolve around having powerful assets and upgrades that you're backed up with some sort of threat of Oppa research. What is it called? Oppa research, I think, which is really important. Yeah, because I don't know how you protect assets otherwise.
To me, that's the classic, like, to me, I'm like, oh, well, that's how I always play Asa. I just keep trying to accumulate value and then say, at some point, I'll figure out a way to win. And that's kind of how I'm looking at Epiphany right now, is I'm going to accumulate probably a lot of value off this ID. And to some extent, even just the threat of this ID, where the runner leaves my stuff uncontested because they don't want me to get these triggers. And that's, like, both of those cases seem good for me, potentially, as long as I can build the deck the right way. So it's facing some really stiff competition. CTM and NEH are some of the strongest IDs printed in one of the strongest factions historically in the game. But Epiphany, you know, it's subtle. Maybe it's not going to be as good, but I think it's got actually a real fighting chance.
Yeah, that's neat. We didn't talk about the ability too. There are cards that we're going to be talking about that gel really well with ability. Understanding what's on top of your deck, understanding the next 3 cards gives you some ability to play into these, which this identity does a bit more interestingly than any other ability has access to. So that's kind of neat. I don't know if it's going to be that different. Like, there's an argument, you know, how people say, like, play your Thule deck in sports metal. I think there's going to be arguments about Epiphany. I don't think it's going to be very clear what is the winning play here, whether you want 2 more influence and just free card draw, or whether you want filtered card draw and filtered click compression. That's kind of neat. I think this is probably pretty good. It's understanding also the runners can play around this. The once per turn ability, you're going to be scoring agendas. You can't really stop that. But once per turn means you need to batch trash. You want to do all those like best effort, best stuff that you've done against like CTM as well to date. So you can control the ability. It's not going to fire all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know where to put this. I haven't played it yet, but like, it's hard to gauge whether this is a powerful ability.
Yeah, I mean, so to me, this is about as powerful as Atea, at least from my impression of it.
Really?
I mean, I think NEH is a really, really good ID ability. It just happens that CTM's is even stronger. And CTM with Hard Hitting News was like pretty, like egregiously strong, a lot of people would say. And I think Epiphany is going to be in that realm. I could see, though, there's forces that could push this out of being a super big presence in the meta, probably Miss Bones being the most notable one. But Miss Bones is probably not going to be with us forever, and I think Epiphany Analytica is going to find its time in the sun, if not immediately, definitely sometime soon.
So like that's a big problem, is I do think a big part of Epiphany's strength is entirely tied into a card that we're like 6 cards down the line for, is like Oppo, because I don't think acid-based decks can function inherently if there's not tag-based economy denial or economy attack that attached to it. And Oppo is obviously, in I think a lot of these horizontal decks, just a fair bit worse than Hard Hitting News. So I'm worried that like these sort of decks, like it's a good ability if Hard Hitting News existed, but if Hard Hitting News doesn't exist and Oppo is not as good for these sort of decks, like it comes down a whole tier. Like there's a chance that like NBN acid spam might be like strictly unplayable at a competitive level. I'm not fully sure yet, but I don't know. I think that's a bigger question, is how good is Oppo more than it is how good is this thing, because the whole like archetype can fall apart overnight quickly. Okay, so if we zoom out a bit, we got to see the Oracle Think Tank. It's a 3/1. It's research. When the runner steals his agenda, give him a tag, TGTBT, and then for a click, you can remove a tag, maybe that tag, to shuffle this agenda into R&D. The Corp can only use this from the runner's score area, and then they don't have that agenda. You've also shuffled your deck, which like sometimes that's kind of cute in Epiphany, but otherwise it's an annoying 3/1 that they might have to steal a lot, and is annoying just to steal, because you're just gonna have to clear a tag. That sucks. You got 1 point and Epiphany trigger, and then you have a tag. Have fun. When's the last time you've been excited for a 3/1 agenda? That's a hard question.
It's been a bit. I don't remember the last 3/1 I was super excited about. I will say,
AR enhanced?
AR enhanced is probably, well, okay, actually no, I think it's probably been a little more recent than that. I think Hyperloop extension with Sports Metal was.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And you could argue Mega Pre as well, which is wild. Like we got 2 good 3/1s for sports back to back, but
yeah.
But yeah, Oracle Think Tank, it's definitely, I mean, it's also like the thing that worries me is I access this against Reality Plus, and suddenly I am like, whoa, like I have to like huge tempo swing and potentially like some real rudeness there, especially because that it doesn't actually have to be the same tag. If I get tagged later in the game, the Corp could just pull that back into the deck, and now maybe I have to access it all over again, which honestly seems like the worst possible fate as the runner. But as the Corp, you never want to score this. Like,
no, you don't score this. It's so bad. Do not score this. It's going to be really rough. Your whole turn for 1 point on an ability that you wanted to have around anyways. Like, yeah, this is basically like a snare. It's imagine that's sort of like House of Knives, except you don't want to score the House of Knives. It's doing its stuff in central servers. So that's kind of neat. You can pile a bunch of these in archives, make a real nightmare happen, and then they can't clear the tags. You can shuffle them back.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it has that sort of like harpsichord energy to it, and to some extent also I guess Epiphany kind of does, where R&D is safer than it looks. But it's worth noting that removing a tag to shuffle this into the deck, removing a tag unless the runner has a lot of tags, that is a real cost. Like runners, if they're not like totally like beyond reproach and they're just in Tag Me City, like that actually saves them a click and 2 credits. That's a lot of value. So I don't think you want to do that at the first sign of tag. You want to do that at like the 3rd sign of tag, where they're like, yeah, I'm just going through your fun houses. I don't care anymore.
Yeah, I think that's all correct. I don't have much more to say about this. To me, this is probably a slots are hard card. It's a 3/1. It's got a good effect, but slots are hard. So
probably there.
Yeah, that's probably right.
3/1's just a bad spot to be. You need to put so many of them in your deck. Admittedly, it's annoying if you put so many of them into your deck, but like, yeah, I don't know. Only in Reality Plus, I think, is that something I'd be really excited about.
I think Reality Plus could maybe actually find the slots for this. I think that would be basically it. But
cool. Balanced coverage. CD Acid costs 1 to red. When your turn begins, you may choose a card type. Look at the top card of R&D. If that card type has the chosen type, once again, you may reveal it and gain 2 credits. It's only 1 influence, it's 3 trash cost, it's credit positive the turn it fires if it fires, so you're trading potentially some information or equally some misinformation sometimes for either credits or no credits. Also not unique, so once the first one fails, the second one's much more likely to not fail. And of course, with Epiphany, if you saw the next 3 cards coming, you're going to hit this with pretty good accuracy. Also, if the runner ran R&D and didn't steal or trash, it kind of narrows down your options to a large extent. This thing is neat. I'm kind of into this thing. I think the information is like somewhat relevant. However, like most of the time, it's just assets you're spamming. Letting the runner understand what's coming off the top of the deck, there's a real cost to it, but also daily business show. Like maybe there's no cost to it.
Yeah, I think it's to me this seems like a more or less the like the econ asset that asset spam yellow needs.
Yeah,
like they've got lots of little single 1 drips per turn, and maybe on average there's a single one of these drips for 1 per turn. But I think if you have 2 of these on the board, you're dripping for 2 to 4 credits a turn, and you can probably just name asset blindly and get it right half the time on the first one, and always land the second one, and like. 3 is annoying for the runner to trash if it's just going to generate an uncertain amount of 2 credit things. So I suspect this is going to sit on the board a lot and solve a lot of econ problems for the kind of wide NBN decks who historically had to rely on like pad campaigns and this is like the card I can never remember.
Commercial Bankers Group is what this replaces, but that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm talking about the subscription service or something. That's like the first time the runner makes a run. Tiered subscription. Yeah, that's like when the runner makes a run, gain a credit.
Which is like whatever.
So, yeah,
no, this seems solid. It's annoying. Can you play it out of NBN? Yeah, I think you could. If you're asset spamming it a different faction, 3 influence for a slot of these. I also think it's so wacky. It's like that's a pad campaign. Imagine, leave it. That's the second pad campaign. Okay, you have to trash at least one of them because they just work in a way that is so much more consistent, which is really, really funny. Something has to be said about the Yomi space here where you can like name asset and then look at the card and not reveal it. And now they think they have an agenda in hand. Like, I think that's so niche considering what those decks are trying to do, but it's always a fun thing to kind of consider that you
and conversely, like if you can like hold, like there are going to be plays where you like name agenda, don't reveal an agenda, add it to your hand, install it. The runner goes, okay, that's an asset. I don't care about any of the assets that they could put on the board this turn. Oops, it was a 3-1. Like that's the way you score an Oracle Think Tank and don't feel terrible about it, right?
Yeah, that's so true. No, really, really funny. Set this up with your Mindscapings. Again, I don't think you need to, and you don't want to trash this a lot of the time. Yeah, I think this is nice. I think this is like a pretty generically playable NBN econ card for horizontal decks.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. All right, we have a fan favorite. Behold, an ambush. It says snare, but 2 tags. Do I have to read it out more than that? I probably should. Okay, when runners access like this, they know. People know. Snare, but 2 tags. No net
snare,
damage.
But 2 tags, no net. Yeah.
No net. 4 credits, 0 to trash cost. I find the trash cost on this thing to be actually kind of annoying because it turns on Analytica. It turns on Oppo research. Like you trash this and then you get Oppo'd because you trash the Behold. Like, we'll talk about Oppo, but like so annoying. Sometimes you don't want to trash this thing.
Or even worse, you access this in Reality Plus on R&D and they just draw it. And now you don't need to get the trash it at all. Like it's such a like I am, as the flavor text instructs, I am afraid of this card.
I am terrified of this card. It's hard to play around this thing. Like you literally can't run past turn 3 with any safety because there's no like good way to clear tags that makes sense in the format.
Yeah. Maybe we're back to slotting no free lunches. Maybe this is the card that Solidarity Chip was invented for, so that we could sit on one tag and then Solidarity away the other one. I don't know. It's interesting because like NBN has historically not had access traps that were any good. And this is like, I think actually a very solid asset trap, and it becomes a bonkers asset trap in Reality Plus. Like, Reality Plus looks like it's a huge winner from the set release. And Behold is definitely an element of that.
It's also weird out of action, right? Like this is 2 influence. So like Snare shows up as a card in the sort of like super modernism Weyland decks. And it makes a lot of sense right now because you care about the tag, but you also care about whittling down hand size if you want to do like public trail into end of line. Startup special, standard still could do it, I guess. But it's interesting to see which one you want more. 2 tags, again, it's not as disastrous as it used to be. There's no boom. It's not like you're just going to lose on 2 tags. So that's actually an interesting flex slot, whether you have more tag punishment or whether you have some mixture of damage tag punishment. That's neat. But yeah, man, I've seen this, and every time I've seen this, it's been a really bad thing to hit at any point in game. I'm really hot on this thing.
Yeah, no, I think, and it like more or less forces the runner to only run clicks 1 and 2 against NBN, which is like a wild change to the play pattern.
Yeah.
So
no, it's huge, and I don't think Snare is, well, I don't think Snare is as popular as this will be in NBN as Snare is in Jinteki.
Yeah, I think unlike like Snare to me has been like okay, there's a very easy counterplay to it. It's actually kind of hard to do. Like I know people who include it because they're like, oh, sometimes it just wins me the game. I think Behold is gonna consistently push you towards winning the game in a way that Snare often doesn't.
Yeah. I don't know. Is that high?
Yeah. I think so.
Yikes. Oh,
like,
man. There's an ambush.
Because like this also like, I mean, like it's also like in your asset spam decks, like this is as good as having an ice on your central in a lot of cases. And the threat of this card is doing a lot. So
I wonder how bad the cost is going to be, right? Like that's a lovely thing for you to reveal with the coverage card, but like 4 is a lot. It's worth saying outside of Reality Plus. But yeah, no, that's it's a good trade. I think it's a pretty reasonable trade, and it'll mess up some runners' turns for sure. All right, last asset. It's political and ritzy. It's federal fundraising. Costs nothing. 2 to trash, 2 influence. When your turn begins, you may look at the top 3 cards of R&D and arrange them in whatever order you want. But if the server is also unprotected by ice, you may draw 1 card. So largely look at 3, draw 1 of them, rearrange the bottom 2. That sets up all your stuff. It sets you up so you know the top 3, so you're not like going with what's the name, Epiphany? You're not epiphaning without insight. You can now see for the balanced coverage what you're going to get into. It's also just a free card draw turn, which like, man, people pay ridiculous amount of influences for wall to wall in their asset spam decks, huh?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very like the other thing. This card, while not nearly as strong as Sensi Actors Union, is a callback to Sensi Actors Union, where it's look at 3 cards and pick the one you want to draw. That's, for 0 credits, that's potentially more powerful than Daily Business Show. Now, it doesn't vary in the same way. It's cheaper to interact with, but it also draws you, like, it's card positive, whereas DPS is kind of card neutral. So, like, this card to me is, I think, really impactful. And then it also has all these Epiphany synergies and the balanced coverage synergy. I think this is going to be a very common include in asset spam yellow decks. And I think at 2 influence, maybe you do start looking at this out of something like HB and Weyland in their asset spam archetypes.
Yeah, and like if you have to ice it up, it's not the worst. Obviously, you don't want to ice it up because you get good value from it. But like this is a must trash. You find this in the early game. There's no hard news. You can get away with trashing this pretty easily. You're not going to be punished too hard for it, hopefully. But this has to go down, and I think this has to go down a bit quicker than the balanced coverage because you're just giving them more card draw to spam out harder on the table. You can't let them do that. It snowballs out of control.
Yeah.
So do keep that in mind.
It's interesting. It is interesting how limited Corp card draw is, and as players have played more, they realize how valuable more card draw is for the Corp, and so that's, I think, partly why we're high on this card that looks like, oh, draw 1 card for 2 to trash. Like, that doesn't seem like it does a lot, but I think it will do quite a bit for a lot of Corps.
Yeah. Now, again, harding news isn't how it is, so I don't think you have to be worried about this on turn 1. If you're trashing it, you're generally getting away with it scot-free, barring an Epiphany counter. But that's a very powerful effect. I would assume that's an auto-include. I don't know how you build an NBN asset deck without this for a minute.
Yeah, and I don't know how you build an NBN deck right now. Well, okay, outside of R+, I don't know how you build an NBN deck that's not an asset deck. So yeah, I think this fits in auto-include quite nicely.
Cool. I think I'll see more play than Epiphany.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we're hitting some ice. This is an interesting one. Starlit Night. Sentry Observer. Cost 5 to res, 2 strength. It just gives 2 tags. All right, 3 influence, but threat 4. When the runner encounters this ice, it gains X and the run subroutines for the remainder of this run after other subroutines. X is equal to the number of tags the runner has. It's really nice to see X on more cards. I think we saw a couple again, but it's nice to know everyone's just super comfortable with X all the time. Yeah, this one's weird, right? Like it's a tag, punishment, and the run card. On its own, do you want to play 2 tags for 5 credit, 2 cost dice? I don't. I think I'd rather play Unsmiling Serevna. Very similar slot. I think it just does more for me. I don't think I care about mass tags. I care about just being annoying enough. But then if the runner is very, very tagged, this gets a whole bunch of end the run subroutines. Unfortunately, they're going to get the end the run subroutines on encounter, so not before the subroutines have fired. So it's not going to be like it's always 2 tags, 2 end the runs with their face checking into it. That's important to understand, of course. But it's like that's sort of like sometimes the downside you have to watch out with Tag Me Sweets is that like if you're a deck and all you're running is fun houses and like classically turnpikes, which is rotated, runners can just run through all that nonsense. We've lost IP block in standard, which was like the tag me end the run ice. That doesn't exist anymore. So if you're trying to find something that like hard end the run in your deck that's running a lot of tagging ice, like often you just end up with like, oh, I guess I have one toll booth in there, maybe some pings, of course.
Yeah, maybe like, a Hydra of like.
Yeah, maybe if you can afford it. So like this is technically in that slot, but I don't know. I don't feel good about resing this at just about any point in the game.
That's interesting because we just talked a lot about how Behold is a pretty wild card. And this only costs 1 more credit than Behold and sticks around for the whole game. Like it doesn't get trashed immediately. So I don't know. Yeah. This is a card where like I know I'm out of sync with the community. To me, this card's pretty interesting because while like I think because we've seen the ability of runners to remove tags go way down, I'm much more interested in cards that give multiple tags and bet scale off of those multiple tags, because I'm not going to be able to end the game on 2 tags consistently anymore. And so runners are probably like, there was that point in CTM, in a lot of CTM matchups, where the correct play was, okay, this is the turn, I'm going to go tag me, I'm going to scout the boom, and we're going to play the rest of the game tag me.
Yeah.
And a Starlit Knight on a central server says, I hope you had another plan, because, you know, if you're on 3-4 tags, this is going to be actually become pretty expensive to break all of a sudden. And the face check on this isn't that nice. Like, maybe it's better than Vampira Nessa, or not Vampira Nessa.
Unsmiling Serevna, yeah.
Thank you, Unsmiling Serevna. But 2 tags, that's still 2 clicks and 4 credits the runner's going to have to spend if they want to shake those tags. And if they don't, well, Starlit Knight's already scaling for me for the late game at that point. So that's like, to me, this is...
Sorry, go ahead.
This is bundling. To me, this is bundling both the generator and the punishment in a single card, which is pretty appealing to me, even though it is coming at something of a premium.
But that's like, I think that's the issue that I have with this. And we've seen this across, like, you know, look at the other 2 sentries up there that do some like middling sort of tag stuff potentially in all parts of the game. It's like, it kind of seems like the answer here is just install your Mimic before you start face checking. And barring the point where you do maybe eventually go tag me where this ice is relevant, like resing this for 5 credits where they Mimic it for 2, that's real bad. And like Serevna costs 3 and has an ability that you can pay them to like ensure some parts of it fire. Maybe that's, you know, a bit of a stretch, but I don't know. I think you're right that if they do go tag me, this is one of the best cards you have, because we've lost things like Thoth, we've lost things like Information Overload was a card back in the day, but like, I don't know. I wonder if you just close the game out sooner than you need like a 4 subroutine and the run Starlit Knight.
I will say Unsmiling is 4 costs, so it's actually only 1 more.
Okay, that's better for Serevna. Mind you, you res this for 3, hopefully if it fires in Reality Plus, which is nice. That's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think this is the worst option of all the like mid-range sentries, but maybe just having an end the run is good enough. But like, can you just play Hydra? Some lists can't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the minority here. To me, this is like, NBN is the tag faction, so it actually, like, even though its effect is maybe a little bit worse, I think it scales better than the other 2. But you know, it is the most expensive of all of these, and the lowest strength, and the lowest individual impact subroutine. So I think there's a pretty clear and convincing, easy case to make that it's not the hottest ice on the block.
Where would you want to put it?
So for me, I would probably put it around Probably just to the right of MIC.
Whoa. Wait, where's MIC? It's here. Okay.
Yeah.
I will, like, I want to put at the bottom of this. Like, I'm honestly, slots are hard. So like,
okay,
our marriage has to be either top of slots are hard or bottom of build around.
If you want to put it at top of slots are hard, I think that's fine.
Okay. Notice how that's I say our marriage and then I tell you what has to happen. That's not, oh, that's healthy. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. All right, we got another one. I do like this one a lot. In terms of like a nice little tagging ice, virtual service agent, 2 cost, 2 strength, single subroutine, runner loses a credit, such a goofy subroutine with nothing else. But whenever the runner passes this ice after encountering it, if they didn't break the printed subroutines with the decoder, they just get a tag, and that is pass. So this card is really neat. IP block is a card we talked about even with when it came to the last NBN ice, because it was a card that, you know, was really important in the meta for being a reasonable piece of ice, but also if they had an AI, this was a punishment. Now, this is not only an AI punisher card, because if they're relying on an Amakua or an Audrey to break this, right, like they're going to get a tag. There's no way around it. They might break the subroutine, but they're going to get a tag. But this also works against Bypass. It works against Banhar. It works against Botulus. It works against Trojans in general. This just like very flexibly hits everything. And on a base face check, it's just Turnpike again, which like kind of like Turnpike, huh?
Yeah. And hey, for those of you still playing Startup, this does hit endurance as well. Like this is really this is none of your BS tools. All those don't work. And so like, I mean, to me, this is going to be the first 3 cards you put as your ice in any NBN deck to me, I think. I don't think it's a super like, it's not a ban me please card. It's like a little bit too niche for it to really like define the like proactively define your game plan. But I'm anticipating a lot of Amakua, a lot of Audrey, a lot of Slap Vandal. So this card just seems like it's in a great position in the meta. At least
it's so cool. It's also really wild, right? Like usually when ice comes out after a rotation, like we're looking at some of the ice and being like, oh man, this is a lot worse. Or sorry, like this ice looks a lot better now that we don't have like Paperclip. And this is the opposite. Like if an NBN deck had to get through this for 3 credits with Black Orchestra before rotation, like I think I'm stoked, as weird as that is. Like that's just good enough, as much as that card doesn't exist anymore. I think this thing's fire. I think this is like so unassumingly just like universally good against like every single archetype.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is an auto include, I think. Just
how's that?
Honestly, I might put it like even one more to the left. Ooh. I don't think we're going to see an NBN deck that doesn't have some number of copies of this. Whereas I think there might be some NBN decks that don't play Behold.
Okay, yeah, no, that's true. I think you're more likely to play that than Behold. I also think a lot of people are going to bounce off this ice and think like, this doesn't matter, I'm not going to play it. And I think, again, depending on the meta, this becomes either one of the most annoying cards to like something you break for 1 credit with Unity. Sometimes actually 2 credits with Unity, right? That's not bad.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, if the runner's getting buzzsawed down turn 1 or like in the first 3 turns, yeah, virtual service agent starts looking a little silly, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool, love it. Very fun card. All right, well, as you might have seen by the timestamp on this video now, welcome to the hour that we spent talking about Oppo research. Terminal Grey Ops operation. This thing costs 2 credits. That's relatively cheap. And it just, as long as the runner stole or trashed a Corp card during their last turn, they got 2 tags. But after you resolve this operation, mind you, you end your action phase. So no more scoring out agendas, no more pending any more actions, just like Hard Hitting News, the card that this replaces. But Threat 3 gates the ability for you to pay 5 more credits to give the runner in total 4 tags. Now, importantly, that fires from top down. So like if you're playing Reality Plus and you get credits from the first part to for the second part, or you want to draw cards and make a decision, you can do that. But understanding that this is what Hard Hitting News looks like. So it is active as soon as turn 1. As long as they steal or trash, you can pay 2 credits for 2 tags. That's an okay baseline. But then you could pay a whopping 7 credits, making one of the most expensive operations that we'll see common play in standard, to give the runner 4 tags. But again, it's not a trace like Hard Hitting News was. You don't care about the runner's money. I think this is such a fascinating card, and this card alone is going to define the entire NBN archetype or the NBN faction going forward. There's no way around it. NBN was Hard Hitting News. That's it. Like, period. Can Oppo be good enough? And how different it is and why it being different matters. What are your thoughts?
I think it's going to force NBN to play differently and maybe a little more aggressively if they want to access the aggressive mode of this. So, like, I could see a world where early Bologna pushes become pretty common because you actually win either way. If the runner steals your Oppo research, or I'm sorry, steals your Bologna, you just get to follow up with an Oppo research, and you're hopefully going to be able to pivot that into some kind of win. And if they don't, well, you just got 3 points, and your Oppo research is now on. Like, there's a lot of ways to generate kind of win-win scenarios for you. And being at threat 3 does make me want to look at strategies that involve some number of 5-3s over kind of lots of X2 agenda suites. Historically, NBN, I think with Opacata rotating, has the next strongest 5-3 in the game in Bologna. So, like, this card's going to fit, I think, in a lot of NBN decks without really having to do a lot of contortions. So then the question becomes, is not being as punishing in the first 3 to 4 turns of the game a killer to this card? And is the fact that you have to always be able to pay 7 worth the, like, which is a real downside, because hard-hitting news was often played in strategies where it's like, oh, both players are at about 5 credits, so you're maybe only hard-hitting news for all, like, 4 credits, 5 credits to land all the tags.
That being said, 7, you often will play 7 for hard-hitting news, but there's a lot of ways to make it not 7.
Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of hard-hitting newses for 8 and 9 played on me this last weekend. Like, it was a super common thing to just be like, all right, runners on 8, we're going to hard-hitting news through that for 7 or 8, I guess. But I think a thing that's really interesting about this is you no longer need to be ahead on money. And that is a big difference, right? Now, admittedly, if you're behind on money, that does mean the runner has the 8 credits they need to clear all the tags. So that is a bit of a downside, right? Or if you're landing it, you're maybe not generating quite as much value as you were before.
Sure. But, like, I think that's the beauty that people are going to understand with this card. Mind you, the windows in which you can fire it are much more limited, especially if you're not playing an asset deck inherently, where there's going to be less things to steal or trash. But the idea is, like, irrelevant of the runner's credits. You can, hopefully, with some ease, generate a fork. I put something in a remote server. I've also Oppo researched you. That's the best thing you can do with hard-hitting news. It's like install advanced hard-hitting news abstractly. You don't see that play a lot. But now the idea is like, yeah, you can clear the 4 tags. I paid 7 for it while you had 20 credits. Like, that's a steal. But then how are you going to deal with the sport state? Understanding how many tags you have to clear. How are you going to interact with my tagging ice? We also didn't mention that a lot of the tag prevention cards are now gone in the format. Misdirection, the prominent way to clear more than 1 tag efficiently, rotated out. Deuce is Wild, the common way for people to clear on tempo tags, rotated out. So we're left with, like, very middling options that are very bad at clearing multiple tags. So, like, that fork is something that's just hard to prepare yourself for. And if they have credits, it's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And, like, one of the big game plans against CTM was like, hey, we're going to get to the mid game. I'm going to, like, hit 20 credits and just try and make sure that CTM never gets close to that. And then they don't get to have the option of that hard-hitting news fork, where they can't put an agenda on the table and play a hard-hitting news because I ran last turn. But that window is now always going to be open to you as the Corp. And that does give this, like, actually more play in certain board states than hard-hitting news had. While still, I think, being a more fair card overall than hard-hitting news was.
Like, you know how many players we've lost who've tried to play standard or gone to Netrunner and turn 1 ran and they're like economy adjacent null deck and, like, just lost the game on turn 1, and admittedly because they had to run because we had an AR enhanced security on the table, which, like, okay, yeah, they're gonna be fine now. They're going to be fine. And, like, that's sick. It's the idea is that, like, okay, there's stuff on the table that you need to trash turn 1. You can check that and not have to worry about your economy. So you can play decks that have less economy overall. That opens up other economy options. So, like, you know, spend your 3 credits on your environmental testing. It's not going to cost you the game. Like, that change opens up so much of the game, and I think makes the game a friendlier thing, while also still having the very potent impact that hard-hitting news was as such an important card that defined and made, like, this tension that is overarching and, like, kind of spanned entirety of NBN games, which can be some of the most exciting games as long as you're, like, appropriately equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, no, I think this card is probably, like, yes, it's weaker. I suspect it's probably going to do enough to keep a lot of the archetypes that we saw still around. Maybe their strengths are going to have to be a little bit different, but I think that's also why we see, you know, Behold, Virtual Service Agent. I would even argue Starlit Night. Like, these are all cards that, like, do some powerful things with tags in how they generate them and how they interact with them that are a little bit pushed and would not be fine in a hard-hitting news world. But we know we're trying to take the power a little bit out of the one spike and spread it out among the faction a little bit more. But I think Oppo research is still going to be played in NBN. It's going to fit in all those Weyland like op kill shells super easily. So I like, this is both undeniably weaker and yet clearly hard-hitting news had enough power that I think, to me, this still feels like it's going to be everywhere.
Yeah, and in some ways it is stronger. It's just not like in the easier ways. It's going to be stronger in ways that you don't see as often, but I still think there's upsides to it. Yeah, I feel like it's really hard to build an NBN deck without hard-hitting news and now without Oppo research. It's just really difficult. I think you have to build the faction around that, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Are we putting under VSA? It's really funny that we are.
I think we might be putting it under VSA, yeah.
Little 2-cost dice. Like, man, the 2-cost dice in the set. What's going on? It's so good.
All the 2-cost dice in this set is great.
Oh man, it's Buckwell.
Maybe we're just value pilled on 2-cost dice.
It's a good cost. I'll play pup on 1. Okay, speaking of 2-cost cards, your digital life. Oh man, so much or so little text on this. Obviously, 2 influence for a gain of credit for each card in HQ. It doesn't count itself because you're playing it. It's no longer in HQ. I'm going to take a shot here and say this is the card that I'm most excited about, more than most people are. This has somehow become my pet card. You don't like this one, do you?
No, I think it's mediocre at best.
Oh, it's so good. Okay, so turn 1, you mandatory draw. You have 6 cards in hand. You play this. It costs you 2 credits. You gained 3 credits. So you, not good, right? But the way that I see that is that there are so many board states in Netrunner, in NBN, but also just in Netrunner, where you start your turn with like 8 cards in hand. Fire Rashida, 8 cards in hand. The chance of you having this very high. Play Reality Plus to take a tag. You're going to start your turn with 8 cards in hand. I feel like there's so many board states that you can manufacture where you just have 7 to 8 cards in hand consistently enough that this is worth just main decking. And it kind of takes that slot that some people started playing non-equivalent exchange. And I think this just has higher highs. The low is way worse, but I think the highs are consistent enough with cards like Rashida, playing Predictive Planogram to draw, Reality Plus to get 2 card draw, and then a bunch of other nonsense, like some of the assets in this, but I wouldn't play it in an asset deck. I'd play it in an operation based to protect Rashida turn 1 deck. I don't know, man. So many times I've started my turn with more cards in my hand than common sense, and I like it.
So I don't love this card because to me, the turns where I have so many cards in hand, I'm usually already winning the game. And so the question I have to ask myself is, does playing a +5, +6 credit card, do more for winning the game than a card that is more consistent in terms of its power level? And in some board states, having +6, +7 is absolutely what you need. But often when I have like a lot of cards in my hand, I want to start putting a lot of threats on the table really quickly. And this isn't going to do that directly. I have to play this and then put an expensive threat on the table and then like protect it with something that's going to cost. Like I need to like build more, and this is kind of horizontal to the direct part of my game plan.
Yeah, I was going to compare it like to Hante Review, which is like obviously playable in more board states, but it's a similar sort of thing. Is that like after you draw Rashida, Hante is such an easy play because you have some garbage you're throwing out, but that card actually deals with 2 cards for a single click, which is like kind of a nicer thing sometimes to be doing after a Rashida, which like, yeah, there's truth to that for sure. I just worry though, like if you're playing an Oppo research deck, like having a burst economy card that you can play on 2 credits, like after certain board state swings is kind of important. And I feel like a lot of these NBN decks, like honestly, non-equivalent exchange feels pretty non-equivalent when you attach it to a hard-hitting news. So maybe that is good enough, but like just having a bit more burst economy might be relevant, as much as, again, I don't think the asset decks are playing this. So maybe that's flawed.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the reason, and this was like a thing that wasn't obvious to me, I had to have someone explain it to me, with why non-equivalent exchange was being played, is because it could turn 1 get you to rezzing a 10 strength piece of ice.
Yeah, The Hydra
and
face
that was
check
really
Acme.
important in Acme, right? That was a huge deal. And your digital life isn't going to have those sort of consistent breakpoints where, oh, suddenly I play this and I'm now able to do X. Like Hansei Review is kind of nice for Jinteki because you can go, okay, I was sitting at my hedge fund level and now I get to turn on Anansi's, or I get to, formerly I got to turn on DNA trackers. And the fact that your digital life is going to be a little bit modal, and you're probably having to support this with Rashida's, or maybe I've already forgotten the name of the card, the political fundraiser. What was it called?
I think it's actually
just called. Okay, like those start to maybe I can play like an Asmari one remote glacier or an R plus one remote glacier and draw some extra cards off tags on occasion. But if I'm drawing extra cards in Reality Plus, well, that means I have all the money I need. Or or if I'm firing Rashida's, I probably have hopefully I have the money I need. Maybe I don't, and maybe that's exactly where this fits in.
That's the idea. Is like now Reality Plus is like, do you want to draw 2 cards or 2 credits, or 2 cards and 2 extra credits?
It's true.
I think this thing's cuter.
I also had
Go ahead.
I could see this doing some stuff. People ask me if this has a place in CI, and I'm like, I don't think it would. Which is
in PD, I think it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of turns you start with 7 cards in hand, and that deck is kind of economy starved.
Yeah, it's true. That's actually a good shout for this for sure. Because that deck was looking for 1 or 2 more econ cards. I personally suspect that Vovo and Greasing the Palm will fill those same roles influence free. But
yeah, maybe
we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. I like this more than I think it does. I don't think a lot of people agree with me with this. I'm just kind of excited. I love cards with this little text that are that interesting. It's strange how you can get that combination to work sometimes.
For sure.
I think you think it's a slots are hard card, and I'll agree with you, but I'll fight for a bit higher than where it goes. What are you thinking?
Yeah, sure. It can go pretty high on slots are hard, I think.
Nice. All right, I'll take it. Awesome. That's NBN. What do you think? It's assets. It's assets out there.
It's a lot of assets, and it's we put 5 cards in auto include. I think one of the epiphanies maybe a little bit of we think this is good. It's probably not really truly an auto include, but NBN's getting a lot of power to make up for the rotation of CTM and hard hitting news. So
yeah, but equally, if we put some good assets up there, just trash them turn 1. There's no hard hitting news, right? Like it's a weird balance how they have to work together. Okay, we're at the point where we have to zoom out maybe a bit, but we'll see where we end up with this card before we decide that. It's our first Weyland card. We spoiled this on the Metropolitan Grid. Slash and Burn Agriculture, 4/2. First time we see the expendable subtype, which are basically cards that have additional abilities. You can play them as if they're operations, largely from HQ, revealing them and trashing them. So for a click and a credit, reveal and trash this to place 2 advancement counters on an installed card that you're able to advance. So very powerful ability that you get that sort of seamless launch, but you can fast advance with it. I don't think there's really much else in the format that you want to advance. Man, so close to wanting to advance it. What's it called? A reconstruction contract with this, but you legally cannot. But the real cost is there's an agenda face up in archives, and you just told your mad dashing runner that there's something there to go grab. So some real costs associated with what could potentially win you the game from fast advance 5-point Weyland problem. What do you think about this one?
I think this card, I think this card's a little cracked. I mean, again, I just came from going undefeated on a fast advanced Weyland Corp deck, and the event was won by a fast advanced Weyland deck. And slot compression is a big deal. And trading 2 points isn't great, but honestly, if I get 2 points and then the runner gets 2 points, well, I got the 2 points first, so I'm probably still a bit ahead of the clock. And once I'm at 4 points and the runner's only at 2, if this gets me to 6, I'm happy to go for the runner to go to 4 because I'm not including 3 pointers in a slash and burn deck. I'm including 2 pointers and 1 pointers that I can fast advance, and I think this is pretty solid. And then
go ahead.
We also have Spin Doctor. That's just going to be a thing, and so sometimes the cost of this card is just the 1 credit, which is a very good exchange rate for a fast advance.
Yeah, on top of that, in op, you could IZF to trash a 1 coster with no threat attached. You just get a Spin Doctor, so that's entirely free, which is really nice. Yeah, it's wild. Audacity is the playable card this is very comparable to, and I don't think you're as often seeing Weyland decks Audacity their whole hand, because generally there's some sort of punishment in there and there's other cards they want to have access to. But this is the sort of Audacity effect that even if you have a hand that's a bit ugly, you're definitely still going to use, either to get an extra advancement counter on an Atlas, which is the game winning play usually, let alone just to score that Atlas counter, or an above the law, or an Aziev. All the 3/2s you have access to. I think they have the high Weyland just has the most 3/2s, right?
Yeah, they definitely do. And to me, this basically can take like a lot of Weyland fast advanced decks were playing two Ozfs, and to me, this can just become one of those Ozfs and buy you a slot back. Because off what I always found with the Audacities, I'm sorry, I said Ozf, I meant Audacity. It probably will also take it'll probably be taking your Ozf agenda slot and your Audacity deck slot. I think.
Well,
that's how
I feel
it like turns one slot into two. It won't take all your Audacities away, but I personally have found that like having two Audacities, I end up with two of them in hand, and one of them is just completely dead by definition enough that I'd start looking to like, oh, you know what? Maybe having one of these in the place of one of my Audacities is good enough for a slot.
That's the one thing I'm worried about is like if you take too many 3/2s out of the deck, this has less power. So maybe you need to keep the SDFs in there. But like I'm also super interested in whether this allows you to play more of the weird Weyland 4/2s that like I don't know. You're not seeing a lot of play, but like there's some winning weird combos that I think you could maybe try and pursue at least.
Kimberlite Field's time to shine.
Yo, Kimberlite Field actually like without paperclip. Let's go. I think it's good. Cool. Yeah, I'm in on this one. I think this one's pretty solid. I think it's pretty scary to play. We didn't talk about the whole fact that this accelerates threat. This turns on Oppo research on demand. Like there's some cool things it does in archives, but again, with Spin Doctor, hopefully it doesn't do anything too much.
Yeah.
To me, that's like auto-include, I guess.
It's
not every Weyland archetype, notably.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like I mean, the thing is, right now it's the strongest Weyland archetype, but I could see a good argument for putting this in build around because there's going to at some point be strong Weyland decks that actually all of the asset op, the like grinder asset op players will be like, no, the 5/3s is the strongest op deck, and so that would be a good reason to put this in build around.
Yeah. No.
To me, though, this is maybe stronger than both of these other cards, but maybe I'm wrong.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if we're just going to see like really, again, ridiculous fast advanced decks at all costs that are just winning like Titan transnational style before the game's over.
Yeah.
Man, it's hard not to put this guy at the top. I'm so into Adrian. So cool. Okay.
I need to shrink the cameras. We haven't talked about the art at all for any of these cards or the flavor text. Adrian, though, I think deserves a special shout out for being just an amazing piece of art.
This video is too long for us to talk, unfortunately, about the flavor, the art, even the flavor text. Yeah, it all slaps. It's all really, really good. Adrian, obviously, huge standout.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to shrink the cameras real quick.
I was like, oh man, maybe we'll do this one faster.
No, much harder. Okay. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're just a bit smaller here to make everything fit, but we got Cyber Sand Harvester. It's an asset. 2 to res. Whenever you res a piece of ice, place 2 credits on this asset, and you can spend those credits to install cards. Install costs. You can trash this to take all the credits off of it, and it's nice that that's a paid ability speed, so the runner is never really given the ability to trash this if they want to. Not that it's still trash, they did it, but they're not paying the 4 credits on this more often than not. It's only 2 influence, so it's very flexible. This is a really weird card. I talked about this on a spoiler video that I thought this is one of the hardest cards I've ever had to evaluate as a spoiler card, on the basis that everything it does mimics some of the most powerful cards in the game, like Estelle Moon. It is a whenever clause attached to an instant speed crack, which is like immense. But again, it's attached to something that you don't have full control over right now in most Weyland decks, where like it's something that takes up your server, but then if it's in the server, it's rezzed eventually. And then the runner doesn't have a huge advantage to force you to run that remote server because all it has is a Cyber Sand Harvester in it. So maybe they don't run centrals. Maybe that's bad for you. Maybe that's good for you. Maybe it's bad for the runner. So it's really weird. It's nice. I think best probably easily in like an Asa deck. Maybe it makes a lot of sense in that sort of like front company Atea deck where you can put stuff on the table at the same time where runners have to check different servers, because this card has like very, very huge 2 server energy to it, where like you can't spend all your time icing this because otherwise it doesn't generate value, so you need to put other stuff on the table to force ice reses. That is until we have a card that allows us to cheaply res or de-res stuff, which like there's some HB support for that, as much as we're not too hot on it. What do you think? I think you're gonna have a nuanced take on this one.
Yeah, so I think the other synergy is Tucana, which we'll get to in a little bit. Right? But this card is really tricky to evaluate. Like I've played with it probably more than most people have, and I still don't know exactly when and where it fits. Because it does have a severe 2 server problem, but at the same time it's like, oh, it's also got this 4 trash costs, so like, you know, honestly, if I only have 2 credits on this, I might let the runner just sack it themselves, right? And I don't have to res this until I'm going to res a piece of ice. So at worst, it's going to be credit neutral, which is, again, kind of similar to Yakov. But Yakov hasn't seen almost any play. So, like, it's tricky. It is a very weird one to evaluate. It also, right now, Op doesn't have a ton of great one-cost targets, which makes some sense. You have to start splashing out of faction to find cool one costs, maybe wall to wall being the exception. But if you're playing wall to wall and Cyber Sands Harvester, those have some inherent anti-synergy with each other. So it's sitting in this kind of awkward spot. But it has some really high ceilings too. So it's a funky one.
There's huge shout outs to an op, right? Like this is the first 2-cost nearly universal trash, which like hasn't really existed before. So like I've heard really fun stuff that you can add instant speed trashes to go get like an Amaze amusements. Like there's some real tricks in there, but you have to spend a lot of influence and effort doing them. But they're going to be like sick highlight reels, and I'm all in for that. So yeah. Strange. Do you ever play this in ASA? Because it does seem like a kind of reasonable ASA include.
It's definitely a reasonable ASA include. It's just the like 2 influence. If this is 1 influence, I think it's like, okay, yeah, you probably look at playing 2 of these in most ASA decks.
Yeah.
At 2 influence, it's a little bit tricky because now you have to evaluate like, okay, that's going to probably cut into my border control budget or my Anoetic Void, but like whatever you were going to try and use to actually score, you have to recalibrate a little bit. Though maybe this is like a ASA fully op big deal, and this is like a way to push your big deal a little bit further. Like this card can do so much, and it could also do nothing. Like it is a truly perplexing card, I think, to evaluate.
But like there's some board states like it's not unique. You got 2 Cyber Sand Harvesters, you're like cheap resing everything with Vovo and then the Stegodon. Like the highs are ridiculous, but I do think that's more of an asset deck than it is like an ASA that's actually building a server at some point. At least that's the way it looks to me. Because influences slots are hard. But yeah, potentially like everything on this card is really good. It's just like it doesn't fit into Weyland Rush decks. It doesn't fit in the outfit in any reasonable way. So like if there's a Weyland deck that's going to capitalize on this, it's going to be op, and even then slots are hard, or it's going to be something totally different, which I'm excited to see. But so I'm looking out of faction, and for 2 influence, out of faction works.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me this probably ends up in slots are hard because it is hard to imagine the slots. And like this is a reminder, like, we kind of said, I think for all of the cards that we're putting in slots are hard, it's not that these cards aren't good in certain situations. It's just hard to imagine exactly where they fit in top tier decks at the moment.
Yes, exactly. And like they're 1 or 2 support pieces away from being like just busted. Like it can be that easy in Netrunner, interestingly enough. And I do think if you get some like res on your choice stuff, like, oh man, Harvester is easy to get value from. That's sick.
Yeah.
All right. Piece of Ice, Tree Line. It's a 4-cost, 4-strength barrier, firewall, let's go. But it's expendable. Firstly, though, just a single subroutine, gain 1 credit, end the run. And then it says you can advance this ice. So just like Ice Wall, and for every advancement on it, you get an additional strength. But because it's expendable, you can trash this for 1 credit, revealing it to place 3 advancements on an installed piece of ice. Ice doesn't have to be rezzed, doesn't also have to be an advanceable ice, but you just get some advancements for relatively cheap. That's very, very good click compression for advancements. We're just going to say this as a blanket statement. Advancing your ice is one of the most expensive things you can do in all of Netrunner. Try not to do it. It's also 1 influence, which is really nice. If you want to spend all 3 of these, that's not too big of a bite into your budget. But again, you probably want to play this with other ice you can advance as much as it is a really nice self-controlled environment, which is great.
Self-synergistic, yeah,
really nice. Also, modal card. It's the same sort of card that like it's good on different board states because it is so modal. But I think I cut you off.
Oh, I was gonna say I'm actually pretty high on this because I anticipate Cleaver and Banner being really big parts of the meta, and Treeline interacts with both of those cards pretty well.
And Slap Vandal, like you can Slap Vandal your way out of this so easily.
Yeah.
Or sorry, you can build a taller tree than the Vandal can slap.
Yeah, and that's like the fact that this, like, I install 1 of these, and I maybe only have to res 1 of these, and then my other, I can just like boop, plot my next tree line on top of my tree line, and I've beat most of the barrier breakers in the game, and the runner has to come in with a real solution to this. I think is super interesting in terms of Corp design, and it's like, I think this also, like, we've been talking a lot about op and outfit rush. This might give BTL rush, or like just BTL Glacier even, a chance to start seeing some real play, because this also interacts really well with Pharaohs and Akhet. It might even interact. Yeah. And like it can even, like at one influence, maybe this is a Proftivost card, because you can advance it to get into annoying places, and then when you draw later ones, you can like drop this on a Messna Chestfoe and make them all run through it a bunch, and like that's great tempo for you. So this card seems quite flexible. Obviously, only being able to put advancement counters on ice is a big limiter. But again, you could look at something like Trick of Light. Like there's lots of different synergies with this card. I think this is a real banger of a piece of ice. So
yes, so much in one slot, and then it's again good on all board states. It kind of feels like the 2-cost ice that we talked about at the above of the table. They're just like universally good at all board states, and I don't think it's as strong as these, but I'm very hot on this. And again, a big part is that there's no paperclip. I think it's only weak to Boomerang and Botulus, and you don't see that much Boomerang. Botulus, yeah, you have to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely will be sad if like this is the only ice you have protecting the early game. The runner runs it, they slap Vandal it, and they've beaten this 4-cost piece of ice for 2 credits. Like that's going to feel really bad as the Corp.
Yeah,
but you can be consoled. Yeah, that hey, this is going to scale really well into the late game, which is the thing that ice and barriers in particular haven't done. So this is a powerful effect.
Auto include. I think I don't know which Weyland decks that are not playing this unless they're like super synergistic, like the outfit.
Yeah, I was gonna say like Op probably isn't playing it, but I don't think that's a strike against this card. That's Op is its own faction to some extent, just happens to share a card pool.
Yeah, exactly. It's its own weird thing. How do you feel about that?
That seems right to me. Yeah.
Okay. We got only one more piece of ice here. It's Valentau. It's the bully. Codegate, it's a licit subtype, 5 to res, 6 strength, so that's really good. And there's additional cost to res the size, take a bad publicity, or remove a tag. So you have some options there. I do think the bad publicity you're going to see more often than not, because you kind of want to speed run bad publicity, it turns out. 3 subroutines to gain 2 credits, the runner loses 2 credits, and then end the run if you have more credits than the runner, obviously in the perfect order. It's 3 influence, huge startup shout out here. I think this is like the first illicit ice, so you can start considering playing regulatory capture and startup, which like that's a pretty ugly place to be in, unfortunately. But right now, bad publicity, at least in standard or like the old pre-rotation standard, has lost bulwark, but like it just won the nationals like 2 days ago. It's a good ability. You res this for 3 credits fewer when you res this in the outfit that says whenever you take a bad publicity, gain 3 credits. And then you res this technically for free if the subroutines fire. I was like kind of down on this ice. I was like, wow, they made an expensive Veritas, which is like kind of funny how close most of those numbers are. The end the run subroutine is important. But yeah, resing this for 0 is like pretty good, it turns out.
Yeah, yeah. And base strength 6. Much bigger than Veritas's too. Like,
yeah,
this is I think a fairly relevant piece of ice. I expect this is going to give outfit plenty of gas. I don't think it sees play outside of the outfit, even despite having some pretty good numbers. But yeah, I think it's a really solid little tool for the outfit. And that deck is losing a little bit of power, and this is probably just kind of keeping that level. So.
Yeah, it's interesting how like the way that you can beat this without breakers just have more money than corporation, but like the speed of the outfit and the aggression of the outfit, yeah, sometimes that is like literally not possible. So it has an out there if you get to the late game that like you can just deal with this for 2 credits. Like that's true, but just watch out. You might not always get there. Yeah, neat.
Yeah, I do like this more for that like we just talked about how Treeline scales in really well. I do like this actually scales in kind of poorly with lots of bad pub. But I that's kind of cool.
I think it's like a niche archetype. I think it's pretty good in the niche archetype, but like somewhere down here.
I think that's probably right. I mean, like I think it's I think that's where I would put it.
Cool. Okay. We have 2 Weyland operations. The first one's called Armed Asset Protection. It's a transaction, cost 2 influence, and you gain 3 credits. Not big gains here, but there's more. You also gain 1 credit for each card type among face-up cards and archives. And if any of those cards are agendas, you gain another 2 credits. So inherently, if you just want to like tempo out to advance something, you're like slash and burn. Oh, the math on this trips me up, but you get at least 4 credits. So cool.
Yeah, you net +4 if you have just a face-up slash and burn in archives when you play this.
Yeah, you're assuming you'll have probably an operation. That's what ends up face up in the bin a lot. Again, if the runner's trash an asset or upgrade, that'll be face up there. You fire Rashida. So it can get bigger than that. Like there's huge bursts. This is one of the biggest bursty 2 credit cards, but it requires a fair bit of setup, and it really incentivizes you not only to have an agenda in archives, but a face up agenda in archives. That's a really hard thing to do. It's really hard to get face up agendas in archives.
Yeah, I think right now this really only works with slash and burn. If we see other expendables in the future, maybe this could see some more play. I think right now it is pretty hard to justify this because it's like, to me, it has a lot of the same problem of your digital life where it's kind of it's like late game econ, and usually you want your operation econ to kickstart your early game rather than shore up a winning board state like your digital life, or the end game board state where you could do something like you could just have actual long-term econ on the board and like extract like this does probably work fairly nicely in op because you'll probably fill up with upgrades, ice, assets, and operations pretty quickly, so that you'd be playing this for +5, probably by turn 6. But
it's not bad.
But you've got extract for +6 already, and so it's like, does this replace a hedge fund? Probably not, because you want the turn 1 power. So it's just hard to see a slot that this fits in right now.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I'm dreaming for one day where you slash and burn to like double advance your 5/3, and then you play this last click, because there's just somehow some amount of like real or fake threat, like actual in-game threat or opera research people are playing around. I would just love to constantly slash and burn, but I just don't think it's there. I don't think this is like an incentive enough to like slash and burn and like leave it. Like, and that's the problem with like, you slash and burn generally to fast advance or to score an agenda out. You don't have clicks left on the turn. You'd rather get that extra Atlas counter. So yeah, it's a bit wild, but like future design potentially. Let's see more expendable cards. I think for this, you need a card that like kind of like power shutdown, but you rip some number of cards face up from the top of your deck. Like, I want to accelerate this thing so I can play it on turn 1. I think this is a binder card.
Okay. I was going to put this like right around Stegodon, but as you say, as I think about it more, I think it's fine to leave in binder. I would put it above salvo testing though.
Yeah, that's fine. It's really hard to find value for that card modernly. It'll change.
Yeah.
Pivot. It's a double. So it costs 2 clicks. It costs only 1. It's trashable. I missed that the first time looking at this. So 3 credits, you can trash this operation. You might be used to only assets and upgrades, but there are some operations that have trash costs, some ice too. Search R&D for 1 operation or agenda and reveal it. Add that card to HQ. And if we've already hit threat 3, you also may play or install a card from HQ, and very openly, that's a card. So go ahead and shuffle up your hand and then go play or install something. It doesn't have to be that card. So it's consulting visit attached to threat, but also attached to the ability to pull an agenda, and it's cheaper, but it's trashable. I think it's strictly better.
Yeah, I think in any maybe not strictly better. There was versions of like NBN like CTM decks that would play this and like would just leave HQ open, and they would use this to tutor their boom, and it made boom pseudo untrashable. And this won't do the same thing. But I think in practice, in current standard, I would take this over boom or over consulting visit any day. And this fits in more decks. Like, this also fits in rush decks as well, which is like such a big thing where it's like, oh yeah, this can be my fast track that also installs the agenda if I'm looking to win that way, or if I have some kind of operation combo kill. This fits in, and maybe I can do both because this card helps support both styles of play in a single card.
Yeah, like digital rights management came out a long time ago and has saw us no play, but that ability was like really strong for certain niche decks. I think like SSO Industries was the only really big one. But yeah, this is a very cool way that you can flexibly play. Get your agenda on the table, get your tag punishment, get your oppo research, whatever you need. It's good. It's also trashable card, so like that's obviously not good for you. But hey, oppo research, you got to trash something. Yeah, I like this. I think this is great.
Yeah, I think this is an auto include in any Weyland deck going forward. Probably as a one of, but
I think some of the NBN decks also want to consider it to find their
tag punishment. That's true too. Yeah, and the 2 influence you definitely can.
Yeah, very easy to play. Okay. I think this is a character who's up there working with that team that we just looked at to protect the Amazon. Angelique Garza Correa. Upgrade ambush, enforcer, expendable, subtype soup. When this runner accesses this upgrade while it's rezzed, you may pay 2 credits to do 2 meat damage. She yells shoot. 2 trash cost, but very importantly, because of the expendability, as long as you hit threat 3, spend a click and a credit to reveal and trash this to just do a meat damage. So that's it. We got an arrow spike. Not Neurospike, Neural EMP. We got Meat Damage Neural EMP finally, which is a card back from the day that just said do a net damage. Wow, this is an upgrade. And this is the most damaging single upgrade, I think, in the entire format, right?
Yes. I mean, it's, I guess if you count the like bottom 2 cards from your hand as damage, it's equivalent.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that's really nice that this can go anywhere. You res it for nothing, you pay 2 credits to do 2 damage, and they probably trash this. The ability on the expendable might seem a bit niche. I think there's just some big value to that, whether it's because you've loosened someone up for an ASIF kill, if you have an urban renewal fire. There's a lot of interesting ways you can get value from this. Neurospike plays. I think punitive counterstrike makes sense with threat 3, but it's kind of hard to work that in. But like loosening someone up just to do a bit of damage before you like public trail into end of line, to play around steel skin, to actually land a flatline regardless of steel skin, that all is really important.
Yeah, and I think the fact that this like fits really well with urban renewal, where you can actually protect your urban renewal with one of these and then have another in your hand to like really enable a lot of flatlines, is like quite scary, and gives those kind of like asset kill decks another really valuable tool. You know, Prisec was seeing a little bit less play as we were kind of getting towards the end of this last meta, but you know, damage is looking to be still really relevant. We're seeing a lot of damage on a lot of these Netrunner, on a lot of these cards from Null Signal. So, you know, this fits right in with a lot of these game plans.
You haven't seen the archetype in a while, but like CityWorks Project on the table with an Angelique and then Punitive, like that's a real archetype that used to be kind of somewhat not uncommon back in the day, and it's nice to see pieces for this. But like, yeah, I think this is reasonable. The numbers on this are all very good as long as you have a deck that cares about that, and it's not that hard to make a deck that cares about that. It's just not the exact Weyland Rush deck all the time. Where do you want to put this one?
To me, this is a build around.
I don't think it's the strongest build around, but it's like a really key part for certain archetypes. Like it's kind of, you know, Fuji. It's like Fuji level.
Yeah, I think that's a good place for it.
Okay. We only have 2 more cards in the whole Corp side of the deck. This is Tucana, remote server only, 2 credits. It's unique, only 1 trash cost. And it says persistent. So even the turn this is trashed, whenever an agenda is scored or stolen from the root of the server, you may search R&D for 1 piece of ice. Go ahead and install and res that ice wherever you want. Doesn't have to be on the server, paying a total of 3 credits less. So as a corp, if you score an agenda on top of it, kind of like a Malapert data vault, but you getting an agenda, or sorry, getting an ice anywhere res cheaply. That's very powerful. That's a lot of click compression, and you're making some money. You're saving money with the Tucana res. But it's also an ambush. It's a defensive upgrade. If the runner needs to get into that server, as long as there's an agenda there, you're also going to get more forward tempo. So hopefully you just generated a scoring window because they spent money and you've got a bigger server that they have to deal with, let alone a border control, of course. I think this card is way more powerful than I think it is, and I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite cards in this whole set, I think. Mostly because to me, it is a reward for scoring that doesn't require the agenda itself to be tempo positive. It works really well with off-world office, obviously, but like I can score even a blank 4/2. You know, if I have to score a slash and burn agriculture, it still gives me a little bit of compensation for it. And then even better, if the runner does manage to make it through my defenses that I thought they couldn't, I get some compensation for it. And that's really powerful, I think, to have a card be both forward tempo and some catch up in this bundled on a single card. It obviously is like it's not free. The first ice you install is probably kind of just getting the cost back on the res and the click to install. But once you start getting 2 triggers, or even if you can just if you have some ice in your deck that are particularly valuable, I think border control is a really good shout.
Yeah.
Where like,
or pulling like a magnet.
Now always get, I can get a magnet on the right board state. I can get a border control on my remote. You know, if I have I could even see a world where it's like, oh yeah, I need to like double up. I need to put a virtual service agent on the central that the runner cares about now.
Yeah.
Like, that's fine. That's actually a pretty reasonable value to just say, I'm going to make the runner's life hard now, because it doesn't have to be the Tucana server. You can ice up a central if your remote's already locked. So this card has a lot of flexibility in it, which makes me really excited about it.
You can also do the trick with Aziev where you trash a 3 coster to get this on the table, and then you can't still res it though. So no, that doesn't work, does it?
No. Correct. Unless you're Op, obviously. Op loves this card, I think, in a way that very few other corps do, because you can like, to me, something I'm expecting a lot of is Amakua still, as I think I've mentioned already. Yeah. And the fact that you can pop him a virus to purge the Amakua and then fetch the Tucana is really good. Like having good 2-cost targets, like people were already fetching Mana Garms, but now being like, oh, I have an in-faction 2-coster that's also an upgrade, so it can just go where this virus went, is really, really nice. And then it also gives you fuel for future op triggers.
Yeah, it sets up your chain where you can get an envelopment, maybe not the best inclusion, that becomes a border control, and then you're kind of doing all your nonsense, which is fantastic. Yeah, I think it's great. I think I like cards like this that reward you for scoring out. That's obviously good for the game. I don't think Weyland has an issue where they're trying not to score out so much, but like, yeah, tempo positive reasons. Would you play a 4-2 agenda that had this text on it? I don't think so, but that's obviously, this is better than that.
Yeah, I don't think I would play a 4-2 that had a 1 scored or stolen, like, tutor for 3 less.
Maybe actually you would.
Maybe you would. I think the fact that this can go higher, where I can get 2 triggers off of it,
exactly,
is really, really powerful. I think also, like, I've played around with this a little bit in precision design, and like it feels like it's a worthwhile shot for the influence in that kind of style of deck. So I think this, like, I think it's most likely going to stay in Weyland, but it does have the ability to kind of start moving around to other places, I think.
Yeah, even Asa, right? Double install, Atea, double install. Like, there's good reasons to find any card that clicklessly installs in any of those decks, as much as 3 influences a bit more than on some of the other cards we've seen today. Where are you putting it?
I think this is a build around. It definitely can't be an auto include, and I think it's a little bit better than slots are hard.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think it's that hard on build around? Because like,
I wouldn't.
The ability is cracked.
That high, probably. Yeah,
that seems about good.
I think that seems about right.
So in terms of Weyland, going through that, we don't have an identity yet. We don't have an ability that like is super synergistic with all this stuff. So we're just trying to take these pieces and jam them into op and outfit. Like, it kind of is a bit for everyone, which is a really nice spot. And I think Weyland competitively is actually in a pretty interesting spot. So we got stuff that slots in, and I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think Weyland is a really rough rotation hit. They lose some good stuff, but I think they still have a game plan, which is nice.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Both Weyland and HB lost like 1 or 2 kind of cool cards, and they got, or like kind of powerful cards, and they got kind of softly replaced, and then they just got kind of generic good stuff, which personally, as a generic good stuff player or generic archetype good stuff player, I really like, and I'm glad we're trying to, not just doing every card is faction lock, mechanic lock kind of stuff. So
yeah, I'm excited for the next set, or the next part of this cycle where we see what Weyland's really up to. But hey, B1001 unique. Neutral tag punishment. This Biroid Enforcer allows you to remove 1 tag to end the run. However, you can only use this ability during a run on a different server. So not this server. It never protects itself. And because they're unique, they can never protect each other because they'll just disappear. 3 to trash. This is really notable as being neutral tag punishment, let alone a neutral end the run. That's totally notable. We've not seen any pure defensive neutral upgrades. Not that this is an upgrade. You can kind of consider that as like a neutral end the run blocker. This one's really weird to me. It's like such a fun ability you want to pursue, but like, it's either that this is like useless because the amount of work that you have to go through to get this to be good is probably better focused on playing more succinct and more direct tag punishment, or there's some praise in deck. And this is the most important part of the deck. It's like one of the two.
To me, this card is basically unplayable because of that dynamic where like, it asks that I have set up a board state where the runner is effectively constantly tagged. And if the runner is constantly tagged, I feel like I should have something better to do than just saying, nah, you don't really run. Nah, you don't really run. Nah, like, it just doesn't feel like that's actually doing enough. And also the runner can just go and run and trash this if they're mega tagged. Like, I have to have multiple of these out to even start slowing them down. And like, if I have them, if I am consistently landing enough tags to make this relevant, why am I not ending their line or like shipping them off to Vladimirsk? Like, those both seem like plausible options that rely on multiple tags that end the game quickly and succinctly and have the exact same trigger conditions as this card.
Now, that being said, the only like upside to this is like things like Funhouse, where if the runner's going to clear the tag anyways, that's a way to generate. Obviously, you lose tempo because you clear the tag for them, but like that's the only way that this will be good. Like the fact that you build some sort of weird NBN deck where they're always going through that spider lady, and then like they always take the tag and you always clear the tag. But again, there's so many ways that falls apart really quickly. That again, it's like Sandberg. It's like a card that I don't think is as poisonous potentially Sandberg, but like the amount of effort they need to set up their Sandberger and have 60 credits, like, yeah, you probably already lost the game anyways. They're just going to close it really slowly.
Yeah, no, I think Sandberg was also going through my mind where it's like, yeah, there's arcane trigger condition that only works when you're already either won or you never get to the point where it wins you the game. So
slapper of a flavorful card, and people are going to love to play it regardless because when it fires, it's going to feel good. But yeah, I don't think it's consistent, and I think there's better ways to do things. That's a binder card, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think to me, like salvo testing, it's going to be some people's favorite card, and like things they're white whale they're going to chase, and I think honestly, it's going to be fun to sniff out those decks and play against them. And then someone's going to figure out presumably, but we always say that at this point.
Yeah, cool. Okay, real quick here, we're going to just take a second to make sure that we feel okay about this chart going down. I'm really surprised. I did not realize going into this that we put cheap ice at the top. I think it's a really funny look, but like I'm all for it. I agree. This stuff is absolutely wacky how powerful it is.
I mean, I've definitely thought about like the making one of those, trying to get someone to do one of those like trash or like staple or trash things. And I'm like, vanilla would be a great example. Like this card looks terrible and is in fact a staple, right? And I think Tatabola and Ablative Barrier are both really good res to roll, and then also just have some really good text on them as well. So I think those to me are like the clear, like I don't think you're gonna play against HB or Jinteki and not see those, and I think you'll see these cards outside of those factions as well.
Yep, you're gonna learn the text on them really quickly, and it's gonna do some weird stuff to you that you're not gonna be happy about. Very powerful. All right, auto includes here. I think Atea is the big question mark. That might be a bit high. I do think there's a chance that this is just busted. Maybe not in this card pool, but I think that's the most interesting Jinteki identity we have in a long time, and there's a lot of ceiling to work your way into.
Yeah, as I think about Treeline and Pivot, I wonder if we should swap them.
You think?
I feel like
I honestly think the barrier problem is a big thing to solve, and this solves it really nice.
Okay, you know what? This is we're not sure what the meta looks like, and Treeline does offer some solutions to what we think might be the first line problems of barriers.
Yeah, so it's a nice spot to be. It's obviously the modality of the card. It's not just the fact that it's a four strength and to run like whatever. I think we are maybe going to be upset about how low we put this, but we'll find out. Again, if Oppo's bad, this is bad. So our whole list falls apart anyways, which that's okay.
Yeah. A teeny feels really high when I look at the cards immediately below it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that looks right to me. Yeah.
That seems okay.
I think it's like all of those. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird to call this a build around. I think you're going to see it consistently, but categories are hard.
Yeah. It's like there's almost like we need this build around, and it's just like
good enough.
Best we can do. Like
exactly. It's like you'll see it. It'll be there.
You'll be waiting for them to print a better version in this slot, but you'll play it in the meantime. Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's the slots are hard that's going to be more it's going to generate maybe more ale fillings that we put like front company below maybe Starlit Night and stuff like that. But like, yeah, I think this is such like a cool card that you might not see enough of. I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll still disagree, but you know what? My disagreement is I think Starlit Night's going to be up a whole category, so we can put front company in front of it because on my list it's.
We're good. I'm down for that, and I think that's it. This is where we're standing on Corp stuff. Again, this is super early. We have a huge rotation, so there's a lot to go over. We're incredibly accurate here, but on that case, we could potentially revisit this in the future after a couple months, after Continentals, after Worlds. Maybe we'll do a video to catch up on this. We usually do that, especially if we're like inaccurate, which is why we didn't do it for the last set. So
yeah, we got the last set completely right. I definitely listen to us and go, oh my goodness, we put raindrops in niche.
It's a weird card.
Yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks Andrej for coming on. These have been continue to be a lot of fun.
And we'll have the runner side up in the next couple of days. It'll be on the Metropole Grid. So if you want to wander over there and see some other takes, I'll be there in a bit. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
All right. It's only 3 hours. It's only 3 hours.
3 hours.